Thank you so much. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Good, great to have you.
Thanks.
So we're here discussing digital transformation, a subject that everyone in this room, I'm sure, is absolutely involved in. You cannot wake up without having something in your life turned digital. Before we get to digital transformation, I want to talk about the transformation of Thomas Kurian, because you've had a fascinating career. You were a longtime executive at Oracle, and then zap, 2018, you took the job at Google Cloud, which at the time was a smaller player in the cloud computing business. You've grown the business dramatically since then. It is a serious contender to the cloud offerings of others, Amazon, Microsoft. I wonder what you saw that the rest of us didn't when you decided to make that leap.
I saw two important things. First of all, that technology was becoming fundamental in every industry. As every industry became digital, whether it was a bank or a retailer or an energy producer or an electric utility, technology was becoming fundamental to every industry. And cloud computing promised to simplify technology so that everybody could have access to it. Every company could have access to it. So the combination of this need and this simplification, I thought, could deliver enormous promise and drive a lot of growth.
Interesting. Trust is such a critical word in digital transformation. How do you convince your customers that they can trust their business to Google Cloud?
Trust is really about a variety of things. Trust is trusting us to provide you, a company, with a platform for innovation, trusting us that we will be in all the locations around the world, for example, here in the Kingdom, bringing our technology to you where you need it, trusting us that we'll keep your data secure, trusting us not just with the platform we give you today, but all the promise of the innovation that we're going to deliver for you so that you can build upon it and transform your business. For us, trust is all those elements.
You mentioned you're here in the region. You're speaking to customers all the time, I know. In fact, I listened to a podcast where you talked about the fact that in the first 100 days or so, you met with hundreds and hundreds of customers. I wonder how the pandemic has changed the needs of those clients and how it's changed the needs of the workplace. What does that mean for your work?
The pandemic accelerated enormously some trends which were already happening in different parts of the world. First of all, it made consumers incredibly familiar with technology. It made them order food online, experience many things online, work with their colleagues through video conferencing, talk to their doctor online. So it made consumers incredibly technology aware. It also made many CEOs look at their businesses and go, do I have the technology foundation so that when I emerge from the pandemic, I can take all the lessons I learned and to bring it forward. Banks, for example, started looking themselves and saying, how can I take all our expertise, the people in our branches, but through now digital media, bring them to consumers around the world. Retailers felt that e-commerce used to be one part of their business, but how do you now make it the core of your business? Healthcare clients who talk to us all the time about, I want to be somewhere where doctors and patients can talk continually, not just when they visit the hospital. So digitization helped companies understand the lessons from the pandemic and then bring them forward.
Interesting. What about education as well?
Well, we've been very fortunate as Google in supporting hundreds of millions of children around the world to learn digitally during the pandemic. Our technology helped bring teachers and students through our virtual classrooms together. Today, as kids go back to school, they still take classes in the physical presence of the classroom, but they use assistance online to continue to learn after they've come home from school.
I wonder if you could give me some examples of what companies here in the Middle East are doing with and what they're learning from their data that they're processing through Google Cloud by analyzing it, using the AI. What are they learning? What are they doing?
So we've just 3 or 4 simple examples. We've done work with the Ministry of Water, Environment, and Agriculture right here in the Kingdom to help them understand, using a technology called Google Earth Engine and our cloud, the impact of climate change, particularly on the water supply. Second, we've helped a large e-commerce retailer, Noon.com, understand the buying behavior of consumers and being able to put in front of them, using our artificial intelligence tools, better products and services and better recommendations. For those who are going to Qatar to watch the World Cup next month, Oradura Group uses our voice technology and our artificial intelligence tools to scale their contact center so that millions who will be visiting the game can actually ask them questions to find the services, because many people will be coming to Qatar from different parts of the world. So these are just 3 simple examples in different companies, understanding the customer, understanding their data, understanding, for example, supply chain. Some of the large retailers now use our cloud along with data from their supply chain logistics systems to understand where will they have bottlenecks, how do they get the right product and service to the consumer when they need it.
I wonder, pick one of those examples you said, and what does it do in terms of some of the things that they measure, like their profits or their productivity or the speed at which they are able to make decisions and flip if something that they've tried doesn't work?
It used to take some companies days to schedule and understand their position on inventory. They can now do it in seconds, in real time. It used to take people weeks to schedule a complex bill of materials. It now takes them less than a few minutes. The faster you can see information, the faster you can make decisions. The faster you can make decisions, the faster you have competitive advantage.
So one of the topics that no one really wants to talk about, but everybody worries about, is cybercrime. And it costs the world hundreds of billions of dollars every year, estimated to be $10 trillion by 2025. How does cloud computing help keep companies safe?
So, cybercrime, as the value of data has grown, and as every industry becomes digital, cyber criminals find it super easy to access and steal data and then hold companies to ransom. So why is that occurring? In almost every cybercrime incident that occurs is a black swan event. The organization thought it was secure, the crime happened, and then they realized that they had a door open. So what we believe is the solution to it. Number one, simplify security. A lot of the reasons that cybercrime criminals are able to get in is that cybersecurity is too complicated to implement. Number two, build in security into the platforms rather than trying to bolt it on. And number three, provide the best tools and technology to allow people to detect and respond to cyber incidents as quickly as possible. So we're helping many different organizations, from financial institutions, payment systems, telecommunications networks, to stay secure using all that Google has learned and all the technology that Google has invented to keep our own services secure.
And I want to ask you about sustainability. You mentioned your work with the Kingdom, with the Department for Water. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how other companies might be using the cloud in order to advance sustainable goals. What are they doing?
So sustainability, the one important element is the more accurately you can measure, the faster that people are able to then make decisions to improve their sustainability posture. So with the work that we did with the ministry was also with the Department of Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. And they used our tools to understand the data so that they could make decisions much more quickly. We've helped many other organizations. A big project we did last year in Europe was with Unilever to understand how the products that they were sourcing in order to make sustainable products for consumers, the food products, the oil that they were sourcing was sourced in a sustainable way. And again, it comes back to understanding all of the data in your supply chain so that you can then deliver products, manufacture them, and distribute them in a sustainable way.
I wonder if you could talk about, cloud computing is a $200 billion market, and 2/3 of that is held by these three big American companies, Amazon, Microsoft, Google Cloud. Big American tech companies are getting a bit of pushback in the world. I wonder what global responsibilities come from holding that position.
The important responsibilities we take is, if you think about the consumer, the device that made computation accessible to every person in the world was really the smartphone, because it made a phone, a camera, a personal computer, and an internet browser simplified and cheap so that it could be in everybody's pocket all the time. Our responsibility as cloud providers is to make sure every organization, from a small entrepreneur to a small business to a large enterprise or government agency, has access to the same technology that powers our services. Secondly, we want to bring it to every part of the world so there are no haves and have-nots. And bringing it, not only are we doing that right here in the kingdom by bringing our cloud region here, but we're also investing in technology training, bringing digital skills so that people can learn how to use the technology.
Thank you so much, Thomas Kurian. Let's give him a huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much.
So from digital transformation, we will head over to the next generation of travel. Very pleased to be welcoming to the stage Richard Quest, together with his honorable guest, His Excellency Ahmed Al-Khatib and Julia Simpson. Over to you, Richard.
Thank you. Right. Have a seat. Excellency, the growth of tourism is extraordinary in this country at the moment. But it's not just here, is it? What we are seeing worldwide is a tremendous increase in tourism. Would you agree? The bounce back is strong.
First of all, I completely agree with you. We recovered by about 60% versus to pre-pandemic, versus to 2019. And people started to travel, and we restored or rehired again 20 million jobs out of the 60 million we lost, or the industry lost as a result of the pandemic. Saudi Arabia achieved historical numbers this year in terms of number of visits and spend. I can assure you that this year performance globally and in Saudi Arabia is much more stronger than anyone expected.
Are you surprised, Julia, at WTTC? Are you surprised that the bounce back has been as strong in as many ways?
Do you know, I'm not surprised, because travel and tourism is a very resilient industry. And after people were literally locked down for 2 years, they were desperate to get out. So they had the money, they had the savings, and they had the desire. So we've seen an incredible comeback. It's come back really, really strong. Numbers are looking good.
And yet, that comeback, which is so strong, has led to tremendous bottlenecks. Issues of capacity, issue of management of numbers, all these sort of things at airports have all been a problem.
Well, I think what you're seeing is a classic situation of demand outstripping supply at the moment. And you're also seeing globally an issue around the number of people that can come back into our sector. We saw that in the opening session. But I have to say, I really applaud the work of His Excellency Al-Khatib, because I've never, ever seen an ambition for tourism quite like I'm seeing here. The investment, the commitment, the energy, the drive. And we, after this wonderful conference, we're going to be holding a summit here, and people are very welcome to come to it. The 28th of November, we're going to be bringing together all the big players in travel and tourism to look at the way forward for the kingdom and for us globally.
When you look at this pent-up demand, and you realize that Saudi is essentially starting an industry and growing it at size, you stand the good opportunity to avoid the mistakes that everybody else has made.
Oh, definitely. This is an opportunity for us. And let me tell you, Chris, the World Bank is expecting the global growth to slow down. However, our industry, and based on your numbers, Julia, shows that the travel and tourism industry will outperform the global growth when it comes to growth. Inflation also is a negative thing, but we expect that the number of arrivals based on your numbers will grow by 300% in 2030, and the spend will grow by 320% in our industry. We started with our NTS, Richard. The vision is clear. His Royal Highness told me two things. I want to achieve 10% GDP contribution from tourism and GDP in jobs. And the third message or third direction is to become one of the top destinations globally. And these are the clear vision. With the clear vision, as Sebastian, the chairman and the CEO of Accor, told me this morning, he said, you guys have a very clear vision, very clear plan. We have the vision. We put the plan, we put all the resources, especially the financial resources, to deliver the plan. We are almost halfway of delivering our plan. We're achieving major successes. We will see more destinations in the near future that will put Saudi Arabia in the top.
To be at the top, define what that means. And I'll tell you why I ask that in such terms. It's not difficult to get the numbers.
Yeah.
You can give, it's true. You can sort of do cheap package tours and you can get Chinese tourists on those visits. You can bring them in by the millions if you want to. But that's not what you need, is it?
Absolutely. We want to create the maximum value and the best experience for the people who will visit Saudi Arabia. And we promise to do that. And we are moving to do that. We are investing in our manpower. We announced the 100 million program to train the young Saudis, and we are building the best ever built destinations.
What would this is an unfair question. What would your guidance or advice be in this scenario, which I know you've probably given privately, but now give a version of it publicly? What's your guidance and advice? Having seen the way to do this in a sustainable way, what would you say?
Well, first of all, look at the value that you bring to your country in terms of economic value and in terms of jobs. Because although we might say those are just tick boxes, they really, really matter. If 1 in 10 jobs on this planet come from direct, indirect, and induced travel and tourism, and 1 in $10. So first of all, you're creating wealth and prosperity for your people, and you're creating jobs with dignity for your people. So that's really the most important. Second, around sustainability. It is true, if you have a blank sheet of paper, if you're building a hotel from scratch, it is easier than maybe going into an old Venetian hotel and trying to retrofit it to make it completely sustainable. But it's possible, and it is happening now.
To the question, why do it? You've got lots of industries. Why do you want a tourism industry?
You have been coming to Saudi Arabia in the last 3 years more than ever. Why you are coming to Saudi Arabia?
I'm asking the question.
We have everything to offer. We have the sun and sea, we have the beautiful, pristine, Red Sea, and we have the mountains, and we have the city, and we have the culture, and we have the great people.
But it's a fickle. Oh.
And very warm people.
But it's a fickle industry.
They've got a very big hearts. They're very, very warm. With the first time I came to Saudi, I had certain ideas in my head. I'll tell you, they just all disappeared. I have never been so warmly welcomed anywhere. lovely people.
How do they avoid over-tourism? Now, I know that might sound like, you should be so lucky, but how do they avoid over-tourism? Because one of the things that came out of the pandemic was we had to change for places like Venice, Barcelona, Prague, all those over-visited places. And I'm not sure they have put in place any new policies.
You know, I think a lot of the destinations that are very, very popular do look at this, and they look at how to spread people out and do it in different times. It is a challenge, though, you're absolutely right. But I think also the world is opening up. Tourists are going to have more places to visit. And I say tourists, but they're just human beings wanting to travel and wanting to experience other people's cultures. You know, there'll be Saudi Arabia where they can come to. I mean, it would be a wonderful problem to have, wouldn't it, His Excellency, to have some overcrowding.
Absolutely. I do come back to this idea of it being an aspirational, inspirational industry. But I think that also clouds politicians' minds in many countries. They get all misty-eyed and forget it's a business that needs decent policies behind it, Julia. They need ministers like here who actually carry clout in cabinet and government because they're also, the dreams.
Well, I also think that, with the great exception of His Excellency and Saudi Arabia that seem to really understand the value of travel and tourism, in some countries around the world, governments have taken it for granted. And they do bring in unnecessary taxes, like in the UK, APD, for travelling on an airline, that they say they're going to commit to green causes, and then they don't. So there's been a lot of mixed messages. I think we also need to remember the world is still not open, China is still closed, and we're still in that battle to bring down the restrictions and make seamless travel a reality. I mean, when you come to Saudi Arabia in a few years' time, it's pretty seamless now. You'll hardly need, it'll be a digital experience.
Yeah. We need to come to a close. We'll be here all in a few weeks, won't we? Again, for the WTTC summit.
Yes.
What do you want to get from that summit?
Riyadh will be the capital of global travel and tourism industry. But let me also mention something. Sustainability. We have to protect the planet. Saudi Arabia is establishing the Global Sustainability Center that will protect the jobs and will protect the environment and the social life. And therefore, we will drive more visitors and more travelers, but in the same time, we have to make sure that we have the policies that will protect this beautiful planet.
Before we finish, there are many things that I would wish to do on my birthday. Spending them with you lot is not one of them, which is why I'm so grateful to His Highness, who celebrates his birthday today.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Becky should be somewhere, and Becky is next.
Up, up. Behind you. Thank you, Richard. Fantastic panel. It's an absolute joy to be here. You could be forgiven for considering that the title of this next panel, How Sovereign Wealth is Reordering the World, is somewhat hyperbolic. But the idea that with managed assets worth more than $10 trillion in 2021, how and where the capital of sovereign wealth funds is invested merits discussion is why we are doing this panel today. My panel is well positioned to do just that, including, as it does, perspective from two sovereign wealth funds here in the Gulf, the Minister of Economy here in the Kingdom, together with leading US and European private banks and funds. So let me introduce my panel here today. His Excellency Faisal Ali Ibrahim is Minister of Economy and Planning in Saudi Arabia. His Excellency Khalid Al Rumeih is the CEO of Bahrain's sovereign wealth fund Mumtalakat. Bill here is the CEO at Standard Chartered. Nicolas Dufourcq is the CEO of France's public investment fund, BPI France. Ken Moelis is founder, chairman of the board of directors and CEO, long title, Ken, of Moelis & Company. Rania Nasher is head of compliance and governance at PIF. And Frank Pettigas, good to have you, sir, is CEO at Standard Chartered. Right, in light of the fact that we only have 35 minutes and we've got 7 of you on the panel, I want to start with a very brief assessment, if you will, of the current geopolitical and economic headwinds that we face. And, you know, our guests here, the participants will be aware of what those are. I just want to get a sense from you guys and a forecast for 2023. I'm going to ask you for sort of 60-second answer on that. Sir.
Sure. So thank you, Becky. I think if you look at the global economy, challenges have been more complex and more volatile recently. If you look at the GCC, you have some of the countries that have the least volatility and the least fragility. If we take a closer look at Saudi, we came out of COVID at 3.2 in terms of GDP percent, but also this year we're projected to grow at 7.4 to 8%, depending on who you talk to, and the OECD looks at it and says 9.9%. Our real challenge is diversifying our sources of growth. One good indicator in that direction is our non-oil GDP. Non-oil GDP in Saudi Arabia has grown at 6.1% in the last quarter. That's very much the highest in 11 years, but still below our ambition and targets. Still more to be done, still more to be achieved. Unemployment has gone down significantly in Q2. We have one of the lowest Saudi female unemployment rates in 21 years, actually the lowest, and the lowest male unemployment rate since recording statistics. So in summary, the region and Saudi offer a very safe place for investments that are long-term and focusing on long-term value creation, especially Saudi being the fastest growing economy this year.
Absolutely. An extremely influential G20 nation. Bill.
I'll echo everything His Excellency said about the region and Saudi in particular. It's booming, as we can see and we can feel through these few days. The rest of the world is extremely gloomy. And if you only read the press or listened to the IMF or listened to the pundits, you'd think that we were all doomed. I don't think that's the case. I think there are some signs of encouraging renaissance post-COVID. Start with the amount of growth that we see in Asia. China, of course, is suppressed by COVID-related lockdowns and the like. There are some other problems as well, but broadly, I mean, China still grew 3.9%, which would be quite a good number in most parts of the world. In the third quarter, and the outlook is bright. The rest of Asia booming, India booming, U.S. remarkably resilient. Europe, of course, is having a very tough time. But when you balance it all out, I see, of course, there are difficult times ahead with inflation hitting full force, with interest rate impacts coming, with central banks organizing a slowdown in growth. But there's plenty of signs for encouragement as well. So on balance, I'd say it's appropriate to be cautious right now, but the gloom arguably is overdone.
Thank you. And we're going to get what I think is going to be a really interesting perspective from those representing the Gulf entities here and those representing Europe and the US. Sir.
Good afternoon, first of all. I'm going to differ a bit with Bill. I think the IMF described the global economy as gloomy and uncertain in July, and 3 months later, it's difficult to argue with that assessment. I think that COVID started a supply disruption in the world. It was the way that governments dealt with COVID, with lockdowns, and I see 3 headwinds. One is supply chain disruption, which started with COVID but has been exacerbated by the war between Russia and the Ukraine. Second headwind is nationalist tendencies in the global economy. It started with vaccines, but now we see nationalist tendencies around technology, around minerals, around several food. And the third headwind is really the end of the era of cheap money. And with interest rates most likely going to increase, I think we are going to see challenges for emerging markets. I think we're going to see challenges for corporates that rely on debt. So my outlook, unfortunately, is gloomy for the 2023, but positive on this region. I agree with His Excellency. I think the GCC and the region, we're fortunate that we see a lot of positivity. And if I'm investing more regionally than I am internationally.
That's fascinating. Nicolas.
Good afternoon. I'm happy maybe to give a European perspective, very centered on France, because my bank is financing mostly French entrepreneurs. We had the first 9 months of France, which were really buoyant as far as the economy is concerned. For my bank, it's a growth of 30% in the first 9 months, never seen before. And of course, we are in the beginning of something which is going to change. So will it be severe? That's the question that probably most people here have in mind. As far as France is concerned, we think that we're going to have two quarters, probably Q1 and Q2, which will be very small recession, and then it'll bounce back. There is an underlying strength of the economy which is there, notably coming from technology. It's absolutely buoying on the ecosystem of technology in France. The deep tech of this country, but also of the rest of Europe, I would probably pinpoint that for the public of today. Europe has possibly difficulties today, but look at the academies of Europe, look at the deep tech of Europe. That's where the science is coming from, mostly worldwide, planetary, and it'll produce huge wealth going forward. So for those who hesitate still to invest in those ecosystems of deep tech in Europe, I would tell them, go, you can do it.
We're going to talk about investment strategy off the back of these assessments momentarily. Ken, before we do that, just a quick assessment, if you will.
Well, it's good to be number 5 and still have the United States left to talk about. Look, I think the volatility we're seeing is a very interesting clash of most fiscal policy around the world. And again, I'll talk about the United States, where the Federal Reserve in June decided to pull out the fire extinguisher on inflation, and I think was just as shocked as everybody in the United States to see $1 trillion of spending come in late August. $1 trillion, by the way, has lost its meaning in the world. As I like to say, it's like throwing 3/4 of Canada, a new Canada, on the world economy. It's a pretty large amount of money. And then the Jackson Hole speech came, and I think what we have is almost a fight between fiscal policy and Federal Reserve trying to neutralize that in the inflation rate. And just an interesting fact in the United States I don't think people know about, there's so much money coming out of fiscal policy that now 20 states, remember the federal government wrote $1 trillion, 20 states are writing checks to their people as well. So California has written $40 billion of checks from the state. Now that used to be considered a lot of money for a federal government. So I think $1 trillion of fiscal spending understates why this extreme volatility in a clash between the Federal Reserve as they try to quell an economy that fiscal policy is overstimulating, and it will continue.
Ronnie.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, all the challenges that we're talking about are multifaceted, and it requires even multifaceted solutions. So in PIF, we are well positioned in a way that our mandate is not only to diversify the revenue, but also to deploy income and deploy investments within the country here. So as His Excellency said, the IMF perspective on the Saudi economy is even higher than the global average, and this creates a lot of opportunities for PIF and for Saudi Arabia to attract foreign investors, as well as we put our money where opportunities are there and transfer the knowledge and innovation to the country. We have manifested that during COVID, so all the investments that has took place then were opportunities for PIF, and it's paying off. And now we are at a time where we need to invest in new sectors. So for instance, last night, the new regional carbon market company has been announced, and the auction just took place a few hours ago, where it's the largest auction for carbon credit. And I'm glad here to have Bill and Frank, because Morgan and Stanley and Standard Chartered were enabler. Even Bill sits on our advisory board. And in PIF, we're not doing investments where we create only opportunities or long-term revenues, but also creating ecosystem. So for instance, the voluntary carbon market, it's not about having a trading platform, but also having an entire ecosystem, being the facilitator, the advisor, even a fund will be created, because there are untapped markets like the Global South, or in the region here, the supply is just 1%. So we are helping nations to achieve their net zero objectives.
That's fascinating. Just before I let you go and get to Frank, just for those who may not be clear, the allocations, the way this fund works is about 2/3 inward facing, a third outward facing. Would I be correct in suggesting
exactly.
that?
Yes.
So you're talking about 400 billion sort of inward facing at any one time, and great,
Exactly.
thank you. It's one of those, I've been living in the region for a long time. I've been well aware of what PIF is up to, and I hadn't actually worked that out myself properly until now. Frank, 2 questions to you. Assessment, forecast, 2023, and I think just because I got you, and it's only just happened, we had Ken talking about fiscal policy. We had the weirdest fiscal event in the UK some 3.5, 4 weeks ago, which, you know, thankfully sort of seems like a kind of bad dream now. Rishi Sunak is now the British Prime Minister, former Chancellor of the Exchequer under Boris Johnson. You're pretty well placed just to give us a sense of your assessment of that decision by the ruling Conservative Party.
Thank you, Becky, for that. And it's good to be the last one, and also to correct the fact that Bill is not yet the chairman of Standard Chartered and me, the CEO. But that's okay. Not speaking on behalf of Morgan Stanley for a bit. So the forecast, I mean, coming out of all these interesting remarks, I just stepping back for 1 second and say that what we're living through and what you've heard about the gloominess, none of this is really surprising, because we've come from, you know, peace, prosperity, free money, to war, massive rate increases, inflation, energy crisis. So no wonder there is this moment of, you know, this sort of darkest moment before dawn, which is effectively what everybody is saying. It's bad, but perhaps it's so bad that, you know, there's still some hope coming. And I think no question 2023 looks a little dicey. We don't really know. I think reading the runes, I think it's pretty safe to say that US is probably going to have some form of landing that's sort of not super soft, but a landing of sorts. Europe is obviously much more in the crosshairs of the crisis. EM looks actually, to Bill and others, Mina, I would not put in EM, but EM in Asia is doing extremely well, and I think will be a great source of growth and investment. And China is an enigma. So that's sort of the forecast. I think in that context, if you think about your point about this title being quite hyperbolic, I think actually it's a pretty good title, because the world is a world where you need big transformation. All the hope that we talked about, or you guys talked about, the upside is around, you know, innovation, technology, energy transition, et cetera. And that requires, you know, a lot of capital, illiquid, and long term. And I think that's where the sovereign wealth funds have a massive advantage. I think the question is whether in the next phase, if you think about this could be an opportunity, a 30 to 40-year opportunity to invest long term, you know, I can't see many funds being able to do this. So I think this could be a massive competitive advantage, a real killer app for sovereign wealth funds to deploy the capital in EM. And I personally think in Europe to accompany this big energy rejig of Europe. To your point about the UK, I think the UK, for some extraordinary reason, decided to have a Reaganomics experiment at the time when you needed effectively to restrict, you know, monetary supply. And of course, that led to all sorts of discrepancies and distortions and a crisis, political crisis. I think it's the real risk of this UK experiment is, well, the risk is it became, I think, a bit of a canary in the mine. So most of you will read the Financial Times, Wall Street Journal, will now be familiar with LDI strategies, which nobody knew anything about before. And so the canary in the mine is there are more places in the financial markets where people have placed large bets that are illiquid with leverage. And we know from the last time this is a risk. I don't think this is a risk that's like 07 at all, because the system is much more robust. And by the way, this was one of the, although the IMF report was very negative on the economy, the IMF mood was very good. Financial system looked pretty robust compared to last time. Sorry, I'm probably exhausting my...
Last time being, no, 14 years ago. That's fine, good, great. Okay, so we've got the assessments, we've got the forecast, so let's drill down on the impact of those assessments as you see them on investment strategy from the perspective of the Middle East entities and the European, if you will, and why they differ. So let's just start. I mean, I'm going to open it up to you and Rania just to sort of walk us through where PIF is at present, both on an inward and outward facing basis. So, strategy.
Perfect. So Rania is the PIF expert, but I'll tell you, PIF has 6 investment policy statements. It's investing internationally and locally. It's investing for financial returns. It's investing for local development. And it's also making some strategic bets. I think globally, sovereign wealth funds invest 19%, 20% locally, and then 81% internationally. PIF, as you just highlighted, does it a little bit more, just for 2 reasons. One, there is a developmental need, and that's been the true DNA of PIF in decades past. 2, the opportunities are more tilted to the Saudi story and the regional story. So that's one sense. What PIF actually helps us do in this transitionary period is crowd in the private sector, make more bold statements, make more bold investments, absorb the inefficiencies in new sectors. We have 4 new sectors relatively: entertainment, sports, culture, and tourism, from scratch. That did not materially exist before 7 years. And PIF is making investments there and in other places. As Frank also mentioned, sovereign wealth funds stand out because of their ability to think long-term and defeat the short-termism, but also to adopt a longer-term horizon and actually crowd in more investors and more investments to different investment theses. So not only are you going to help developmentally, but also you can help the world globally on many global issues and many investment themes and opportunities that we think are important. For Saudi specifically, the transition from the old economic structure to the new one, where we diversify away from oil and diversify our sources of growth, PIF is playing a big role in that, not only as an economic tool, like we mentioned, but also as a solution provider.
Do you want to pick up, Radi?
Yeah, just to pick up on His Excellency's with regards to PIF. With PIF, it's positioned uniquely where, you know, a lot of deployment are happening towards developing untapped or undeveloped sectors. So, for example, if we talk about the entertainment, now Qiddiya will be opening in the coming few years. This is the capital for entertainment, sports, and arts. And with the level and amount of changes and enhancement and improvement of the local regulations to attract external investors, now Six Flags is investing in Qiddiya. The same thing in the Red Sea Development Company, where the tourism, for the niche tourism, is part of that. We're having now the Savvy, which is the e-gaming, e-sports. So now the economy here and in the emerging market is more attractive due to the more rules and regulations that protect investors, as well as, for instance, the recent investments that PIF is doing in India for the digital economy and transferring the knowledge. There are investments worth $1.5 billion. The same thing, the recent investment in Egypt in the fields of agriculture, pharmaceuticals, where these collaborations are making, the world is really interconnected. So we have always to do the investments where we can transfer the knowledge, the innovation, to create sustainability in the economy. And it's part of the DNA of PIF. As long as we're doing well financially, then we have to do also well socially. So we have also socioeconomic impact regionally as well as globally through the investments that we do. So we are a main contributor to the Quality of Life program, which is one of the vision realization program. So PIF has a lot of targets towards increasing the housing ownership, towards creating jobs, where we have so far created directly and indirectly through the companies of PIF, 500,000 jobs, and the plan by 2025 to create 1.8 million jobs. And these jobs are not in terms of quantity, also quality.
Is that on track?
It's on track, and it's being tracked, and tracked actually by the National Performance System Center and also by the Ministry of Economy.
Your Excellency, you wanted to jump in?
Just one quick thing. I mean, the 2 trillion target, AUM, that's an input target. There are a lot of output targets that we're measured against as government officials, but also PIF and its own governance. I think overall, globally, sovereign wealth funds are investing more, maybe 20% in the last 3 years, more in renewables than before. Also investing in startups directly. I mean, this is something that wasn't seen in the past. We have the oldest sovereign wealth fund in Kuwait. We have one of the ones that achieved, in Norway, achieved economic diversification. And we have PIF, which is challenging many concepts. But in Saudi, you see a lot of social transformation, a lot of economic opportunities, and a lot of social responsibility. PIF, and at the intersection of these three, you have inclusive growth. PIF is playing an important role, not only PIF, the whole government, an important role in all 3 areas, whether it's social change with the new sectors that PIF is taking the lead on, economic opportunities, which are capturing, and social responsibility, redefining ESG, promoting today's announcement, so many things. So again, not only an economic tool, but a solution provider.
The fund was established 2016 alongside Vision 2030, right, in its current sort of structure. Yours, sir, in Bahrain, established in 2006. How was the investment strategy? Let's just sort of talk about where you are at. But I do wonder how the role of that fund has changed over the years, and how familiar or not what we are hearing from our esteemed guests from Saudi.
Mumtalakat was established in 2006 as a holding company, and assets that were owned by the Ministry of Finance were transferred to Mumtalakat. Public Investment Fund has a similar mandate when it was first conceived. And the idea is to run these companies and extract better value and to increase shareholder value. The shareholder is the government, is the Ministry of Finance. What's evolved over time is that, much like we've heard from Public Investment Fund, number one, we wanted to make sure that we were active as a shareholder, as an owner. And that is really translated in terms of the governance. How do we have the boards of these companies set up? How is the C-suite? And we challenged them and became very vocal, much like a private equity firm would do, but we have a long-term mindset. And it's changed the dynamic in which these companies are working on. We hold them to strict KPIs. We ask that they're fit for the future, their 3-year investment strategy. And this is something that Temasek has executed very successfully over time, Khazana and others, the sovereign wealth funds that are holding companies. So I think this is a component of our strategy. Investing regionally is a common theme you'll hear around sovereign wealth funds. We're no different. To be a catalyst, I think you've heard from His Excellency and Rania how the PIF is opening up new sectors. We're doing the same. We're investing in waste to energy. We're investing in healthcare. We're investing in sectors where the private sector fears to tread and where the government has to act as a catalyst. We're always conscious not to crowd out the private sector. But I think this is a responsibility that sovereign wealth funds have to aim for. I'll end by saying another important component. Internationally, we think that innovation and technologies, I think my fellow panelists have said, this is done extraordinarily well by the United States and Europe. So when we're looking at this, we're investing as an LP, for instance, in renewables, in medtech, in blockchain. We're going to learn as an LP. We're going to think about co-investing as a second level. where we suddenly sit on the board of that company, but want to sit alongside a GP. And then ultimately, all of that is about bringing that technology back home. But I think it's a process. It's too early. You first need to learn, then you need to become more active, and then you need to think about how you have that connective tissue back to the regional economy. That, in a summary, is our strategy.
Talking about crowding out, I do want to address a question as soon as we've finished this part about whether we are seeing the crowding out of the private investment bank in what is this, new and slightly different world of sovereign wealth investment. But be that as it may, Nicolas, let's just get your perspective on strategy and role at present.
Yeah, the choice that has been made in France, we were established in 2013, okay, was to put together an organization which is a bank regulated by the European Central Bank, and at the same time a sovereign wealth fund. Meaning by that we structured the organization absolutely centered on the interest of the entrepreneur. Of course, I am centered on generating results for my shareholders. But basically, the daily life of my team members is how do I satisfy my customer, which is the entrepreneur, all across the French territory, which is why we have 50 branches. And we are cropping all the deal flow of France, be it classical private equity or startups. It's also the reason why we are in the top 3 sovereign wealth fund investing in technology, because we are just ingrained in the ecosystem of all the French academies and cities. So we offer to the entrepreneurs a sort of one-stop shopping with loans, equity, consulting, innovation financing, everything. One-stop shopping, city by city in France. So it gives the possibility of a new shape, I think, of a sovereign wealth fund, which is just grounded on the territories. Now, what we are investing into is basically the future of France. It's called France 2030. So we have to achieve the metamorphosis of the society and the economy, vertical by vertical. Change agriculture, change industry, change services, change health, change everything. Through technology and through the generation of ecosystems of young entrepreneurs, which are basically revolutionary. We also finance the big groups and the big guys. We are shareholders of, I would say, half of the CAC 40. But what will change France is the cultural move, the cultural wave of new entrepreneurs, which we see every day in the country, and which is also the reason why I'm very optimistic on what's happening today. In all the regions of the country, because the metamorphosis is happening under our eyes. So we chose that scheme of a fund, and I think that was the right choice at that time. Is it complete? I think it's okay. We also finance exports through our export credit agency. All this is gathered in one single organization, which is very powerful for the country.
Bill, your perspective.
You mentioned the 10 trillion of sovereign wealth fund money. That's a huge amount of money, but it's very small as a percentage of the total money being managed in the world. But it's super high impact. It's high impact, I think, for the reasons that His Excellencies have all mentioned, which is that it's long-term in orientation. It's sort of destined for future generations. I think how the money is deployed in different sovereign wealth funds is very different, and we've already heard that just on this panel. Mix between domestic and international, very long-term versus more diversified portfolio investments. But where I think when I think about the theme of this whole conference and investing in humanity, one of the key opportunities for sovereign wealth funds is not to crowd out capital, but to crowd in private sector capital. His Excellency mentioned that several times. And that's happening in many cases. So the opportunity for long-term patient capital that could have a political or invest in humanity objective alongside it can do a world of good right now. When we think about the financing gap for transition financing to a net zero economy, we're talking about $100 trillion or something that's missing. That money needs to be identified, needs to be delivered. It can only come from the private sector in scale, but it can be catalyzed substantially through sovereign wealth funds, which is happening. We certainly see that with PIF. We see that with other sovereign wealth funds. To the extent that we can get this snowball rolling, I think we can actually solve our global climate problem. Then we can move on to the other pressing problems of inequality, poverty, et cetera. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity for sovereign wealth funds to have that kind of impact.
Frank, Ken, yes.
Well, you talk about 2023, and I think we're ignoring the fact that the world is going to see an experiment, I think, come to bad fruition in front of them. And I'm thinking of the German economy, where they went to the process of the last 5 years. They decided to outsource their energy to Russia, their end market to China, their labor to Eastern Europe, their military to the United States. And I think you're about to see that experiment not work to the benefit of people. And I do think you're going to see, and again, I love being Saudi Arabia for this, because I think sometimes they say you can't ask a fish what water is about because they don't understand the concept of water because they're in it. But the world's reawakening to the fact that oil and gas is the fundamental mover of civilization forward, and what has brought the world into middle class at such a rapid level over the last 50 years. I think we've gone through a period where we've taken that for granted. I think that we've restricted capital to it. 75–80% of the financial institutions in the world are not allowed to invest in oil and gas, to the detriment of the 7 billion people who need it to reach the middle class. And I think we're about to see that, and I think it's happening real time right now as people realize how important baseload, basic energy, despite all the transition we want to happen over the next decade, whatever we want it, we need the world, 7 billion, the world needs affordable energy to live their lives and climb the ladder. And I do think the West, and I know a lot in this room here, forget about those 7 billion people as they go back to the cocktail party in the Upper East Side and talk about energy transition while billions of people are trying to get to middle class. And again, I want to say I think the world is tilting in this direction because you've stayed focused, and energy is the lifeblood of the economy and the world civilization. I think people are going to wake up to that fact over the next 6 months.
Sir.
Me to add anything to this? I mean, maybe your point, which is I agree with you. And then the beauty of this, of course, now is that it is in the hands of those who've actually got the capital derived from the energy bonus to actually be able to, and I'm talking about the PIF and others in the Middle East and elsewhere, to be able to also affect the metamorphosis of the world. And to borrow the phrase from Nicolas, because actually that is, we're talking about the SWF, I think what's really interesting about the sovereign wealth funds is that from the outside looking in, or from planet Mars, you look at sovereign wealth and you say, okay, they're big, they're effectively state-owned, and in a world of capitalism normally doesn't rhyme with efficiency, boldness, transformation, diversification. But in fact, that's actually, it's really we should put it on its head. They are the most bold, they are the most long-term, they are the ones who effectively are going to shy away from the short-termism, and I think are going to help enormously, hopefully, with what you're talking about, which is this ability to deal with the energy crisis, both making sure the investments continue, we keep the flow of energy going, as well as investing in the next generation. I go back to my point about the rejig of the entire energy system in Europe. My view is Europe in 10, maybe 20 years will be an energy powerhouse. And it will have to be, because otherwise it won't survive. And you need capital, long-term capital. So the question, where does it come from? I think it will come from sovereign wealth funds.
There is definitely a sense that this is a more sophisticated investor in this era of mega fund at present. Is this an era that crowds out the private investment bankers?
I don't think so. I think it exactly crowds in private capital because it's long-term, patient, and relatively sophisticated. So the impact of a PIF or any of the funds that we're talking about here, investing in a company or in a country, in terms of bringing in the private sector, that the credibility that comes with that is tremendously valuable. So no, I think I'm not concerned about crowding out at all. And I think we could probably do more to crowd in. I'll add to that, the other people that we can be crowding in are the multilateral development banks, who have been absolutely woeful in terms of their contribution to this fight. The sovereign fund taking a lead ahead of the institutions that are owned by the richest countries in the world. This is another huge opportunity for crowding in.
That's fascinating. I've got one more question. We've only got 30 seconds left, but I do actually think it's valuable, living as I do in Abu Dhabi and seeing the strategy of Mubadala and particularly Mubadala, if not Adia. The emergence of partnership and collaboration between sovereign wealth funds, I think, is fascinating. I'm not going to give everybody an opportunity to do this because we haven't got time, but who would just like to pick that up? I'm talking about risks and rewards here.
Sure, definitely. I think if you look at the region, the GCC specifically, the upside of economic integration and collaboration is huge. The net positive is huge, even if deltas were different sizes for different countries. And I think the sovereign wealth funds, as they collaborate, that's a great example. You can create a 1 + 1 = 3 situation. I want to go back to His Excellency's comment earlier. We have history in sovereign wealth funds in the region, but not all sovereign wealth funds globally and the region invested in taking the, let's say, endowment that they have, whether it's capital, opportunities and access, into transforming it into institutional capabilities. I think Mumtalakat sets a great example in that area. Some of the sovereign wealth funds in Abu Dhabi, and today I think PIF 2016 in its new form since 2016 is becoming a player that is not only its success factors is not only its capital, but also the investment intellect that's being developed, the partnerships, and most importantly, the cause. PIF has a clear cause to drive after, and collaborating with other entities, I think, punch over your weight.
We have run out of time. Final thought, anybody desperate for their yes, go on, sir.
Just I want to add to it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a risk to sovereign wealth funds collaborating. I think there's only upside. We see partnerships that we've developed with Mubadala, investing internationally and locally where we share transactions. We have similar mindsets, long-term investment. With the Public Investment Fund, we've done one joint investment. I don't see the risks. I mean, we invest with general partners, and sovereign funds are becoming like general partners. They have very sophisticated investment teams, a long-term investment horizon. I think it's a good trend that I think we'll see growing in the future.
Well, I mean, when I talk about risk, I mean, let's be quite clear. There has been some significant investment by the regional sovereign wealth funds in the Russian fund, for example, which at present must be somewhat of a concern as we continue to watch that war and conflict unfold. I'm going to have to wind it up. I would love to sit here for longer. This is a fascinating conversation. I'm sure all of you, who would like to share in continuing this will be able to do so with our participants. I've got a show to do at 5 o'clock local time, so I need to get on and do that for the time being. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Ben. Welcome to the FII. To introduce our guest, which I'm sure he's no stranger to many of you, Ben Horowitz has co-founded the Andreessen Horowitz Investment Fund in 2009 with his phenomenal partner, Mark Andreessen. The firm has over $35 billion under management and invests in crypto, software, and also healthcare, consumer management, enterprise, fintech, and games. But Ben, most importantly, you're also a voice for what the transition of VCs could be. You've transformed the way a traditional VC operates, and I'd love for you to share with us, how did you get to the realization that you needed to shake up the system?
Yeah, well, venture capital firms historically have been very small partnerships, and because of that, they've kind of had to focus in sort of very specific areas of technology, and there's reason for that, because when you get a bunch of extremely smart people together, they don't always necessarily get along, and so you have to keep it small to keep them from killing each other, as Mike Moritz said. And so one of the things that we realized is that if you decompose the firm into basically a set of smaller firms focused on different technological areas such as crypto, bio, infrastructure and so forth, you could have the power of the size with the precision of the smaller firms.
And when you came up with this initiative and the concept to restructure, was that pre or post-COVID?
Well, it was a little bit pre-COVID and a little bit during COVID and a little bit post-COVID.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And this decentralization of the workforce that we've all seen throughout COVID, it's affected different sectors in different ways. How has it impacted your work stream?
Yeah, so COVID was very interesting in that we were forced out of the office and to go remote. And we noticed there were many, many changes in the technology industry that came out of that. The first thing that we kind of found out as we were investors in a company called GitHub, which basically is a product that every engineer uses. And you could see from the GitHub logs that about 42% of the engineers had migrated out of San Francisco, out of Silicon Valley during COVID. And so that was a clear indication that for the first time, really, the kind of center of technological talent was going to distribute kind of around the country. And then similarly, we looked at our own employee base, and the desire to be able to have more flexibility and not be in the office every day was going to be a real thing. So, you know, from that, we kind of basically surmised that there were going to be multiple technological centers in the U.S. And we're seeing that now with both kind of Los Angeles and New York emerging as quite significant.
So in this spread of talent around the United States, does that mean that Silicon Valley can be replicated? And is it exclusive as a mindset to just the United States of America, or is this something that could actually spread around the world, given that people are now working in disparate various areas?
Yes, well, I think it definitely can move because the talent can move. And so the key, you know, I think a lot of times people look at it through a money lens and say, well, you know, where's the capital, or but the capital finds the talent in technology. And historically, the way it's worked is when everybody was kind of proximate to each other, if you were a genius computer science and you were born in Riyadh or you were born in Bangladesh, you would likely move to Silicon Valley. That was the right place to go to have a great career. But now, because you can work from anywhere where you can cluster a lot of talent has a real chance. And so the way we look at it is any area that's got a great computer science program at a university has a potential to be a technology center.
So would you say then for a city that really would like to attract that kind of engineering talent, is the key the business, the funding, or is the key having the supply chain from the engineers that come out of the education system?
Yeah, it's definitely the third.
Really?
Because money moves.
Okay.
Like, it's very easy for a dollar to go from Silicon Valley to New York or Riyadh or Berlin or anywhere. The talent is the much less fungible property.
Interesting. So when you talk about the change that the world has experienced because of COVID and this talent migration, has your focus changed? I know you've done a lot of investment in bio and healthcare, but has that become overwhelming investments now? Has that lessened what you're looking at in other sectors, or are you pretty even across the board?
Well, there's many interesting areas. Bio and healthcare is particularly interesting because we moved from, you know, what was a chemical model of a human to an information model, and that's opened up all kinds of possibilities that we didn't have before. So, for example, if you look at cancer, in the chemical model of cancer, a lot of people die of cancer not because it's not curable, but because we catch it too late. So, you know, you have to get a biopsy to figure out if you have cancer, and generally people don't get a biopsy until they have a lump because, you know, it's a very dangerous procedure. With an information model, you can sequence somebody's blood and apply machine learning and figure out if they have, you know, stage 0 cancer in, you know, many, many different types. And so through a blood test, you can diagnose cancer, which basically means you can cure cancer, because if you get it at stage 0, most kinds of cancer are already curable.
Mm-hmm. And so where would you say you see the greatest opportunity? There's the opportunity of today, but then there's also the opportunity of the future. And what are the two that you would flag for this room of people who are really interested to see where your company is investing?
Yeah, so I think that the big, the most obvious exciting platforms are bio, AI, where we're seeing like phenomenal rate of change and breakthroughs, and then crypto, which is going to be sort of the equivalent of the internet of money and property rights, which kind of will over time transform virtual world into being a kind of full-fledged economy.
So crypto.
Yes.
What are your thoughts? And how do we manage the Wild West that seems to be out there?
Yeah, well, managing the Wild West is a harder problem. So crypto is really kind of fundamentally important in the same way, you know, when we started the internet many years ago, we didn't have native money or native property rights. So what you ended up with is kind of single companies becoming extremely powerful who could control large parts of the internet. It wasn't sort of a free market economy. And crypto is basically the technology that transforms that and gives you those things. That's like a fundamental, important, powerful change for humanity. At the same time, you can also build a casino on it. And that is, there's a lot of activity on that side as well. And so I think we do need kind of smart policy to kind of recognize what is, you know, the gambling side and what is the kind of fundamental building block of a more open and fair internet.
Interesting. And when we look at AI, you hear the fear factor on one end, but then the profound positive impact. How do you, as an investor, when you're looking at the various initiatives that you're investing in, how do you make your judgment on where this is going, and how do you stay on the light path of good versus where this could possibly go?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Andy Grove said years ago, the former CEO of Intel, somebody asked him, is the microprocessor good or bad? And he said, well, that's the wrong question, because that's like asking, is steel good or bad? It doesn't matter, it is. And, you know, once something is, it's our job to make it good. And that takes a lot of work and forethought. But these technologies, you know, you can't put it back in the bottle. It's, you know, outlawing AI, it's basically you're outlawing linear algebra, you're outlawing math. And you can outlaw math, but people are still going to do math, and it's going to, you know, there's not actually that kind of policy answer to it. So what you want to do is you want to work to build the right kind of AI in the right way that's good for everybody.
Okay. So Ben, you've written 2 books. One's called The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and What You Do Is Who You Are. From when you wrote those books until today, are there any nuggets that you still wake up every morning and go, I was right?
Well, you know, they were popular books, so I feel like they were right. You know, to me, in What You Do Is Who You Are, kind of the biggest thing that I think is right is that when you talk about culture, particularly in companies, it's not a set of beliefs. It's a set of actions and behaviors. And so often people focus on, well, here's our values. Well, your values don't mean anything. The only thing that matters is like, how do people behave every day? And so if you don't write that down and you don't enforce that and you don't have mechanics around that, you really don't have, you know, you don't really have a culture.
Amazing. Well, Ben, words of wisdom. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Princess Rima and Ben Horowitz there. Let's give them one more big FII round of applause. So we still have an enormous amount coming up for you this afternoon as we look at the clash of priorities and the clash of generations. That will be our summit within a summit. That's coming up a little bit later this afternoon. Still to come, we are delighted to be bringing onto stage in just a few moments the Minister of Energy, His Royal Highness Prince Abdul Aziz bin Salman Al Saud. And he has not one, but 2 moderators with him today. He'll be joined by Daniel Yergin, as well as Halima Croft. So stay with us. We will be right back.
What is energy? Where do we get it from? At what cost? What drives us forward? While we live in days of global energy crunch and uncertainty, there's only one guarantee. The future won't be fueled by the same energy that brought us here. The conflict in Ukraine has squeezed Europe's gas supply and caused fuel shortages across the world, driving up prices. But while some countries have reluctantly turned to coal, others simply saw no way back. Germany is planning to expedite its clean energy transition, an initiative that began 3 decades ago to move off coal by 2030 and source 80% of its electricity from renewable sources. France is now aiming to completely stop using oil, gas and coal. And green hydrogen is on the rise, with demand expected to skyrocket from 87 million metric tons to 680 million by 2050. What does the seismic reconfiguration of the energy economy mean for the wider global economy? Will countries in the Northern Hemisphere pull off the transition to new sources in time for winter? What types of green energies make optimal investments, and how can governments support long-term financing? Could this be the most extraordinary case in history of turning a crisis into an opportunity? Is this the tipping point for renewables the world has been waiting for?
Good afternoon. We are so thrilled, Dan Jurgen and myself, Your Royal Highness, to be moderating you on this session on the new energy economy. We are going to be splitting moderating duties. A question on the current energy landscape and energy crisis. As you think about this moment that we're in right now, in terms of the war in Ukraine, in terms of fears of shortages globally, how are you thinking about Saudi Arabia, and how are you thinking about this energy challenge?
Well, first of all, I want to start that I don't want to be short of being gracious amongst all the Saudis, both women and men, of being gracious hosts. And I would like to welcome everybody for our FII. And there is also a Saudi particularity that when we speak to people, we don't give them our back. So I want to apologize for those who are behind me. It seems to be the organizer should have put some seats with the rotating seats. This way, we would appear egalitarians with our friends. We are in a critical time, a critical point. I'm still mesmerized with the idea that people can have a single doubt that Saudi Arabia, the country with its history of carrying the motto and delivering that motto over the last 35 years. Dan and I, unfortunately, we go back 36 years ago, which is an admission that I should not say, but that's reality. We have coined that logo. Saudi Arabia is the most secure, reliable, and dependable supplier of oil. Show us when did we ever forfeit our responsibility, did not deliver to everybody's expectations. So we look at this situation with a great deal of sense of responsibility. We have a duty to fulfill because we have a record that we would like to maintain. In giving the situation today, and Dan would probably validate that, I have not seen yet any circumstances, any energy crisis that has evolved in such a way, with such a diversity, from different inputs, with different trajectories, and they all could convolute in what we could call it the worst energy crisis that the world might attend to, with the exception, of course, of what we underwent during COVID. Or it could be the most diverse, complex situation or prelude of a crisis that we need to congregate in trying to find solution. That solution is not going to come from one country. It's not going to come from one source. It's going to come from a diversity of solutions with serious attendance, but more important, a state of avoiding that state of denial that we have a crisis, and not to continue with what I call it, kicking the can policies that are actually delivering more accumulation of complications.
Well, let me jump in then, as you're talking about energy crises, and with another question. Some people think the energy crisis started on February 24th when Russia invaded Ukraine, but of course it started really more than a year ago when the markets became very tight because of underinvestment, lack of tight supply, strong economic growth, and so it's been going on for 6 months before the war started. But now we're looking at a situation come December 5th when the European ban on import of Russian oil goes into effect. And Your Excellency, I want to ask you, how is Saudi Arabia preparing? What's your dialogue with Europe right now to assure that Europe doesn't run short of oil because it can't import Russian oil?
Very simple, business as usual. We have a very capable company. Even that company has a very capable trading firm. It's Saudi Aramco and Aramco Trading. We've been approaching our friends in Europe just to make sure, although Aramco is capable in its own to do all of the work, but we wanted to, for the purpose of emphasizing how serious we are as a government in trying to be attentive to the situation and working with European governments just to make sure that if there is any type of facilitations that are required. We are engaged with so many governments, and I can name few, and you could check what we're doing with them. Just to give you an example, Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic, Croatia, Romania, and others. They're going through a phase of debottlenecking their supply chains and supply systems to ensure that we can come in. I can share with you a number with our good audience and whoever is hearing me. Back in September last year, Saudi Aramco was supplying Europe with 490,000 barrels. This September, Saudi Aramco was supplying Europe with 950,000. Where we would be in the next few months, we will be the same. We will be the supplier of those who want us to supply them with.
Your Royal Highness, could I ask you about the spare capacity issue in the context of the most recent OPEC meeting? That meeting generated, some controversy in Washington, but how do you think about that decision in the context of building back spare capacity? And how do you see your role using that capacity? Because there have been previous moments, the Gulf War, where Saudi Arabia significantly ramped up production. When Libya went out in 2011, Saudi Arabia increased by 1 million barrels. You helped backfill the United States when we had Hurricane Katrina. How are you thinking about building back spare capacity?
As a historian here, he will tell you how the Gulf War was won. If it wasn't for Saudi Arabia excess capacity. During the occupation of Kuwait, and I don't want to spend so much time on history, because I think what is important in this event is focus on our future. And this is one of the things that is probably I would call it frustrating us as Saudis, because we made a pledge ourselves to focus more on our future, a deliberate future that we have put together a plan for. It's called Vision 2030, and it really disturbs us to see our focus divert from attending to the vision. But just to go back to your question, the reason that the occupation of Kuwait happened is because we had 3 million barrels, 3.2 million barrels was produced extra from Saudi Arabia to mitigate the total summation of what we lost because of the occupation from Iraq and Kuwait. When the situation evolved in Libya, for example, we used that excess capacity in the form of about 1 million, which is almost 70 or 80% of what Libya was producing. Could anybody tell me in this audience or any other audience who could have delivered, and many other incidents such as Katrina and what have you, who could have saved the world economy if it wasn't for that excess capacity? And why it is argued now that if we feel, which is purely economical, and Dan was telling me a while ago that he was attending the IMF and people talked about imminent recession. In fact, the IMF was warning the world as the worst is yet to come. If we see everybody's talking about recession, and it's not just about recession, it's about how severe the recession might be. If we talk about the uncertainties and layers of uncertainties about what will happen to China zero COVID policy. And by the way, just 2 days ago, it was reconfirmed that China will continue with its own policy, which means that what the much talked about potential growth is probably will be still in waiting to happen. If we talk about the uncertainties that are being generated about sanctions, about caps and what have you, because we really don't know how it would play. We don't know, and I don't have a magical thing to tell me what a country A or a country Z would do as a result of the kickstart of these things. So in a way, we do have an uncertainty that will come with some gloomier pictures of what this next year will be. What would be the best solution is to mitigate. I still would like to have an audience, this audience or other, and I'm willing to offering to go in a public debate with the who is who about which is more important, being attentive, preemptive, and engaged, including taking measures ahead of time to prepare you for what might be the worst yet to come, or you forfeit that opportunity. And when you forfeit that opportunity, you lose time, you lose chances. And what we have learned as a tough lesson that can never be repeated, in 2008, we let it go, and look at how much time it took us to bring about the correcting measures. Why should we go as far as to 2008, 2020? Had we taken the measures that we as Saudi Arabia called for in March, good chunk of the damage that happened to the markets would not have happened, and corrective measures that would have been started earlier could help us to mitigate much earlier.
So, Your Excellency, you mentioned 2020, and of course, that was a time in which the U.S. and Saudi Arabia very much cooperated to stabilize the market. As you mentioned, I was at the IMF meetings and was quite struck by the general pessimism about the world economy, and obviously that was reflected in the OPEC Plus decision. But I live in Washington, and as you know, Washington is looking through two lenses: one, the war in Ukraine, and two, inflation, and has obviously had a different perspective on that. But now we're looking at December 5th. We're looking at the uncertainties that come after that. How to get that relationship and an energy relationship back on track?
Well, I think we as Saudi Arabia decided to be the maturer guys and let the dice fall. And what I utter sometimes, not because of me, because of whom I represent, makes a difference. So I usually, as you always hear me, I'm not terribly vocal, and I use a low tone. And I'm quite picky and choosy about the words I use, because I know for certain that when the tough gets going, or when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. So I'm keeping that chance for a proper panoramic execution for how Saudi Arabia can fulfill its own promises.
Right. But I guess given, as you pointed out, the risks and uncertainties, it is important to restore a good dialogue to manage the situation.
I believe, and again, it's a debatable issue. I cannot claim that it is one-way street, but it's debatable. From my personal experience, I hope you can share your own experience, Dan. There is nothing better than upholding your wherewithals for the very time that you need to use it the most. If we did the retention of capacity and we have lodged it back as excess capacity,
right,
it pays off. If you look and you talk to even people that are market experts, there is a gulf of difference that the world has X percentage of excess capacity than a lesser capacity available at time of crisis, which are, as you have been saying, could be imminent.
Right. And
can you imagine that this so-called potential of a more severe crisis happens when the world has less capacity? And I would have to say also less emergency stocks. People are depleting their emergency stocks.
Yes.
Had depleted it, used it as a mechanism to manipulate markets, while its profound purpose was to mitigate shortages of supply. Be it as it may, it's everybody's choice. However, it is my profound duty to make it clear to the world that losing emergency stock may become painful in the months to come.
Right. Well, I think Halima and I were talking before this session, and Halima, you were pointing out that actually no one knows how things are going to play out in December, and that obviously emphasizes the importance.
I know, there's so much uncertainty in terms of the sanctions, in terms of the price caps. As you think out on this market, what is your biggest source of near-term anxiety as you look out over the next?
Luckily, I don't suffer from any type of anxieties.
She's a very calm person.
Yes.
If I suffer from any anxiety, I wouldn't be in this seat.
Yes.
Your Excellency, no one wants you to have anxiety.
No one does. But actually, to pivot, we are headed into...
There are people that sometimes call me as, oh, we don't understand him. He's a very cold-blooded fellow. Yeah. I have to maintain my sanities. Yeah. I represent the country that is calling energy is its home. I cannot but conduct myself without being conscious of the aura of this country, of the image of this country, of the legitimate seat that this country had earned. And if we don't conduct ourselves in such a way, we lose the narrative. You remember in February 2020.
Yes.
Can you please recite to our good audience here and those who are willing to watch us and hear us properly?
Well, since it's now, we can talk about that meeting. It was previously off the record, but a Bloomberg reporter broke the story that you were talking about. It was in February. We had the early reports of COVID-19 cases, and you were pushing for a significant production cut. And I remember you said to all of us in the room that when your house is on fire, you call the fire department and you get the biggest hose. You may lose your furniture, but you save your house.
Absolutely. And I'm still with that simplistic, simple-minded example. I will tell you it's the same, because there is a difference between taking a preemptive action, a proactive action, in which way you will be able to attend to this situation as they may prevail in a much better way. In 2020, it was the embers. Because if we had that, as I described it a while ago, if we had, in this situation, we have the opposite direction. But it's the same tools in the same kit is still applicable. You need to make sure that you build a situation where if things goes to the worst, you have the ability to come forth. And let's not forget, in 2008, demand was going up and up and up, or at least it looked as if it is going up and up. And so we kept producing as Saudi Arabia, which is a tough lesson that we learned. We kept producing, and for those who followed that year from the energy community, they would know that the more we produce as Saudi Arabia, the more prices got higher and higher and higher. And the reason for that was everybody in this world was saying we're running out of capacity. Again, I would say it and ask the experts. Running out of capacity has a much dearer cost than what people can imagine. It is not a summation issue. It is a psychological issue. The market will be driven by a different parameters once we get rid of excess capacity. Would people like us to give it a trial? I cannot try it because we've been through it 3 times. We may try it maybe in the next few months when we have what everybody is concerned about. Can we mitigate all of the problem? No, because it all depends on, and again, how much oil we will be lost, if we are going to be losing oil. But I have to confess that talking about caps and floors, and by the way, it's very funny. What we know, it's not in the public domain, but we hear it, is that it's a very funny phenomena. The floor is probably going to be higher than the cap. Hello? I don't understand it, but this is the reality of today.
Should we turn to transition?
Yeah, could we pivot, Your Royal Highness, to another topic? We are headed into COP27 in Egypt. Many of us who've known you for years, we often come to see you at the Saudi Energy Efficiency Center. You are the father of energy efficiency in this country. As we think about COP27, can you walk us through the initiatives that you are most excited about in terms of transition?
We're extremely excited that first the host is Egypt, because what brings us together with Egypt. But the excitement is even being doubled because in COP27 we're talking about implementation. And that's why His Royal Highness the Crown Prince decided to move the Green Initiative and the Middle East Initiative to Sharm el-Sheikh. And you know why? Because we have a lot to showcase. Because of its implementation nature, we have lots of things to showcase that we are in the implementation phase. And we would like to show what we have implemented, and we would like to show what we will be implementing. And there will be quite a few surprising events. We'll keep it to ourselves. After all, we have to have the element of surprise. That's
Are you
why
going to give us a little hint?
Huh?
Yes,
A little hint?
teaser?
No.
Trailer?
No. We keep it as we've learned from TV series. We have to keep the audience engaged, otherwise. Can you imagine watching The Sopranos knowing what would be the second episode?
I wondered which movie or television show you were going to mention.
Or for that matter, Game of Thrones.
Right. Not your description of the oil
What comes to
market,
my mind
I hope.
now is the... Huh?
Not your description. I hope it's not your description of the oil market.
We should, we owe it our, actually we owe it also to our friends in Egypt. Right. We're partners with them in making that COP succeed and succeed resoundingly, as also we are fortunate that COP28 will be hosted by the UAE, and we'll keep them coming. Right. What we want to make sure of is that we will demonstrate to the people. Amin is giggling now. Keep it to yourself, Amin. We really put our money where our mouths are. Now, we want to show also, we want others to show us where is their money and where are their mouths.
So, I guess we have a couple more minutes.
Yes.
I think we. Do you want to say? I know you want to ask a question about the ministry, but maybe just, and I don't know if this is one of the secrets you want to keep, but just one of the. When I was at the ministry and saw the things you're working on, obviously hydrogen was one of them. Do you want to say anything about just where your thinking is on hydrogen now?
Yeah, and this is again what I alluded about in the beginning. You know, all what we're going through, the fiasco, if I could call it that we're going through, is a real cause of frustration, or not of me, for me, but for our entire ecosystem. As a ministry, as companies, as regulators, as all of the above. Again, we want to focus back. Our challenge today is how we can maintain our focus in delivering the Vision 2030. I hope I would not, I haven't sought his pardon, but I will seek his pardon in public, that I would say a few words about Vision 23. And I hope I would be forgiven for what I will say. Vision 23 is no longer the vision of the Crown Prince. Vision 23 is the vision of all Saudis. The amount of women and men, the thousands of women and men, proudly repeating it, the thousands of women and men that are working in delivering that vision is astounding. We owe it to them that we make it, and we owe it to everybody who would benefit from it, that we stay on the same track. Right. The rest, to us, is nuance.
Right.
Yeah. I have to be, and that's why we are also guided with nothing different than what a responsible government would do. You know, I keep listening, are we with us or against us? Is there any room for, we are for Saudi Arabia and for the people of Saudi Arabia? Right. Is it bad? Is it wrongdoing? Is it being impolite? I will be the most impolite public speaker if I say I am not for pro-Saudi. And we will have to deliver our ambitions.
Well, thank you. I think in the time we have, you have one last question that flows directly from what you've just said.
Yes. So, Your Royal Highness, equality is one of the themes of this year's summit, and I have known you for years, and I remember going to the ministry, I think 16 years ago, and you let me tell this story, so I will blame this on you if anyone gets mad at me, but I remember going to the ministry, and there was no women's room for me to use at the ministry. And I was pregnant, and I had to use your bathroom, and the difference now, when I go to the ministry...
But I made you use my bathroom, so just in case,
This is very...
Yes.
I left the office and I said, you can have the bathroom.
You let me tell this story, because when I go to the ministry now...
And I checked it with my wife, by the way.
we pre-cleared this
for
question.
the purpose of transparency.
But it speaks to when you go to the ministry now. I could not have envisioned, when I met you 16 years ago, the profound change I would see in this ministry. I mean, it was older, it was male. And when I go to the ministry now, it looks like a tech firm. I feel like if you're over 35, you're in the distinct minority. And women occupy some of the most important positions in your ministry. You have built an incredible pipeline of female talent. And so my question to you, Your Royal Highness, is if we are at FII, number 16, will we potentially be sitting on the stage with Her Excellency, the Minister of Energy from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
This FII is what, 6?
10 years from now.
10 years from now, 15 years from now.
So why 16?
Okay.
Halima, you visited us. Dan, you visited us. I would invite everybody to come and visit us. And by the way, we at the ministry, we don't go for equality. And we don't go for affirmative action. We have transcended all of these things. We go for meritocracy. Merits governance. So when we recruit ourselves, we don't care. We care about the talent that we are recruiting. But I'll give you an example of what yet to come, more to come in Saudi Arabia. A few days ago, I made a public announcement. It's good that our friends here share it. A university that myself, Amin, quite a few of the audience here had graduated from. It's called KFU PM in Dhahran. Even a female kitten would not go through that gate. It's as bad as this. I'm sorry. Not a female kitten would go around that vicinity, even a mile away. True, they introduced graduate program 4 years ago or so, but it was quite a small number of, they would come at night and leave at night. It's like, a clandestine activity, To be educated was like almost a clandestine activity. What we did is we admitted last year for undergraduate girls to be admitted. And we get away with a 20% admission. Here comes Johnny, wait. This year, we admitted actually 40%. And if it wasn't for a dormitory issue, which Aramco will hopefully will finance one of these as a good gesture of goodwill, I will give you a statistic. In their evaluation sheets, the cutoff point in the overall evaluation sheet was, and by the way, this subject is more dearer to me and more profound to me and more important for all of us. They had to accept those who had a score of 98% from the girls that they were planning to admit. For the boys, it was 94. But if it wasn't for the handicap of the housing or the dormitory facilities, I honestly, and we know what, we get away with 40% today. If it wasn't for that dormitory the limitation, I wouldn't be surprised that the number would have been 60%, 40%. Isn't it, after all, disheartening to see women with that potential, with that insistence, with that commitment, that she is to be prevented from given an opportunity? And the answer in Saudi Arabia, no.
Thank you for that very positive note about the future and making the future happen today. On behalf of Halima and myself, it's been a great pleasure to have the opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Royal
Thank you.
Highness.
Thank you so much for that frank and open conversation. Really looking forward to the surprises to come in Sharm el-Sheikh there. His Royal Highness, Prince Abdul Aziz. Stay with us because right now we are moving from energy back to the digital transformation. And I'm very pleased to have coming to the stage. We have somebody to talk here about the new frontiers in governance in the age of technology and how Pakistan is ready for investments in technology across the digital matrix, inviting business leaders. Please do give a very warm FII welcome to the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, His Excellency Shehbaz Sharif.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure and an honor to address this wonderful and highly prestigious forum, Future Investment Initiative, a great vision of His Royal Highness Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and this speaks volumes about his vision and forward-looking great mechanism of his future, how His Royal Highness the Crown Prince wishes to see not only Saudi Arabia as a great country in times to come, but also involving other regions of the world to move forward with speed and become countries where men and women are empowered, where progress and prosperity is the order of the day. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the guiding principle of environment, social, and governance which constitute the right combination and perhaps even the prism to look at and assess the world of today and tomorrow. Nothing could be more important to us than this very challenge: how to ensure that our collective tomorrow is better than ours today, and that we are ready for it, that we have the tools, skills, and technology which enables us not just to navigate the complex world of tomorrow, but to also shape it today in a manner that has the most beneficial impact on humanity. We are living through truly transformational times. Throughout history, such times have triggered political, social, environmental, and economic changes. These changes have been powered by imagination, innovation, and action. Yes, bold, decisive, and consequential action. But the pace of transformation and change was never as swift as it is today, with the power of technology driving the world towards a future that only few could imagine in the past. We are well positioned to harness the dynamics of change. Tech power is a great equalizer. It can cut through social, cultural, and financial barriers and empower those who are equipped to leverage it. In Pakistan, I have seen with a sense of great satisfaction how young women and men are crafting their careers, like I have seen here today, here in Riyadh. What a wonderful sight, where men and women are working together for the good of mankind and their prosperity and happiness, and boosting their earning power by using tech in diverse fields within the larger digital metrics like e-commerce. My curiosity to learn and fascination from technology has led to close interaction with such experts. Serving as the Chief Minister of Punjab, أنا في الماضي جاء رئيس الوزراء البنجاب منطقة البنجاب في الباكستان لل10 سنوات. I saw the fruits of my policies when I introduced tech innovations in the educational health sectors. Using technology, we provided conditional cash transfers to schoolgirls, stipends, supported specially abled people, gave timely agricultural inputs to farmers, provided free laptops in hundreds of thousands to deserving and high-performing students, established a high-tech safe city in the city of Lahore, which is the capital of Punjab in Pakistan, set up smart schools, introduced digital technology in our immunization program, and linked markets for more equitable buying and selling. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe Pakistan is uniquely placed to leverage this change. We have one of the youngest population in the world. Most of these youngsters are equipped with the tools of the new digital world. They are hungering for more skills and more opportunities. Their talent is already recognized. Pakistan is the fourth most popular for freelancing country. Ladies and gentlemen, consider this combination: a large and young digital savvy population and a massive unmet demand that simply cannot be addressed through existing means of production. Today, a family in urban and rural Pakistan has access to mobile phones and internet, aspires to high education standards, wants to buy consumer products, and needs everything from insurance to healthcare. The importance of this huge demand can, I am sure, be well appreciated and recognized by investors and entrepreneurs present here. I have deep confidence in this young generation of Pakistanis. This is why I am fully prepared to invest our scarce resources of my government in providing them with enabling environment for innovation. While technology is unleashing new potentials, our world is also undergoing cataclysmic changes. Global warming is upon us. Extreme temperatures over time are changing weather patterns and disrupting the usual balance of nature and our ecosystem. Countries like Pakistan, with negligible carbon emissions less than 1%, are vulnerable to the adverse impact of climate change. Pakistan experienced historic heat wave in March this year, and torrential rains from June to August, which led to devastating floods in Pakistan. And the province of Sindh, Balochistan, KP, and Junub al-Punjab, they were all inundated by flood waters. And this was not because of our making. It was purely climate change induced. Therefore, the northern globe has to appreciate and understand that the countries which have become or are becoming victim of climate-induced torrential devastation should be supported and given due help in terms of technology, in terms of design, to have strong, robust infrastructure, whether it's zara, it's agriculture, or industry, or any other field of undertaking. The rain and floods in Pakistan has affected 33 million people, and more than 1,700 people have died, including infants, children. More than 2 million houses have been damaged, and over 3.5 million acres of crops have been lost. Rose bunni kullu shaja fil ma' yani zahma kathir jiddan. Lakin inshallah, bismillah, we will stand on our own feet. We will work hard. We will work hard, inshallah, untiringly. And we are extremely grateful to our brotherly countries and friendly countries, including Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and my very respected brother, my leader, His Royal Highness Prince Mohammed bin Salman, created air bridge between Saudi Arabia and Islamabad and Karachi, sending food items, tents, and other very important items for flood-affected people. We are very grateful to our brothers in Saudi Arabia, and we are deeply obliged for this very timely support. Ladies and gentlemen, as societies place greater premium on sustainability, clean energy is the driver of the new economy. Looking back, my administration in the province of Punjab was exploring solar power in 2012. We established 1,000 solar power park in Bahawalpur, which is south of Lahore. It is since producing 400 megawatts with spare capacity to generate the balance. As Prime Minister of Pakistan, I am leading from the front for the development of Ashra of 10,000 megawatts of solar power to meet Pakistan's peak load demand. Yani, هذا الكهرباء من الشمس هذا لازم جدا للشعب الباكستان للمعاشي, because when we import oil at these and gas at these exorbitant prices around the globe, Pakistan, which is a developing country, cannot afford to finance the import bill to the extent of $24 billion, $24 billion. Our economy cannot afford. Therefore, we have, alhamdulillah, a lot of sun over there in Balochistan, in Punjab, in Sindh, and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So we have launched a program of Ashra Alaf megawatts of Kahraba min al-Shams in Pakistan. And we are upgrading our rail, ports, airways, water, gas, power, and digital infrastructure. With a young and growing population, the market is expanding. Our government is encouraging private enterprises to drive the economy. The government is investing in public goods. These too are available for partnership. So public-private partnership. And I would like to propose to my brothers and sisters sitting here from Saudi Arabia and other countries and globally, min al-alam, that here is an opportunity where the world wants to have green energy. where we want to avoid pollution and minimize our problems in the air. And the answer is Karaba min al-ma, Karaba min al-shams, and Karaba and wind power. That is the future. And for that, I'm here standing before you, inviting you to please come forward. And I, as Prime Minister of Pakistan, but at this very, very important forum, I am telling you very frankly, this wonderful gathering and wonderful arrangements has pleasantly surprised me. It has been a wonderful occasion to be here. I've been to such summits and conferences around the globe, but this is Davos in desert. It is a remarkable achievement by our Saudi friends and Saudi corporations and Saudi young leadership headed by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. My dear friends, my brothers and sisters, Pakistan has many higher educational institutions. Some are recognized internationally. I propose, therefore, that the Future Investment Initiative should consider establishing a satellite center in one of Pakistan's leading universities to explore the rapidly growing Pakistani market and spur innovation among our young population. The satellite could become the center of a network of researchers, innovators, investors, and service providers to harness the capacities which, if optimized, would take Pakistan to a higher level of social and economic development. Ladies and gentlemen, Khitaman, Pakistan is open for business. Let me assure you, as the Chief Executive Officer of Pakistan today, that we as a nation are ready to reach out to all of you and entire globe and find potential investors and grab the future with both hands. As the Prime Minister of Pakistan, I am determined to deliver efficient and competent, transparent governance in these difficult times. I ask you to join hands with me, and together let's unlock and unleash our combined energies to carve the future we all want for our coming generations. Thank you very much, and it's a great occasion. God bless you.
Thank you so much. Let's give another round of applause for His Excellency. Thank you very, very much. His Excellency Shahbaz Sharif there, the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, speaking there about new frontiers in governance, talking about how Pakistan is ready for investments within technology. I do know that from my latest podcast, in fact, where we focused on Pakistan, that it is right at the center of the tsunami of crises that is hitting particularly the developing parts of the world. The rising oil prices, the rising food prices have made the cost of aid packets, for example, to those who are trying to recover from the floods, twice as expensive. I also know from interviewing a number of digital leaders in Pakistan about the digital talent, about the engineering talent of both men and women. So thank you for that really passionate comment and passionate call to action, Your Excellency. We still have quite a lot to come. In a few moments, in fact, after this next panel, I will be back with a selection of guests, and we will be talking about the clash of generations, because if you think about it, everywhere you turn these days, the world is out of joint. And actually, we've talked about some of those issues, some of the issues facing the world. It's also, at least in part, because the young and the old are pulling us in different directions, those competing needs, those competing priorities. Before we get there, however, we're going to stay in this digital world. We have to lead us through the meta-industrial revolution, a fantastic panel, and I'd like you to give them a very warm welcome. Please welcome Ryan Chilcott and his panel.
The meta-industrial revolution is upon us, and it will change the world. from economies of goods and services to those based on data and knowledge, from the physical to the virtual, eroding boundaries that may have held back global integration in the past. How should businesses, investors and governments prepare? How can emerging economies maintain competitive economic advantages in these new landscapes? How will this revolution reorient human civilization?
Well, welcome everyone. In case you hadn't already noticed, we have a collection, a panel of absolute rock stars today from the United States, France, Saudi Arabia, and China in the business of everything from aerospace, defense, finance, semiconductors, telecoms, and transportation. So please join me in welcoming Patrice Caine, Chairman and CEO of TELUS Group. Patrice.
Good afternoon.
Omar Ishrak, Chairman of the Board at Intel, former Chairman of the Board at Medtronic. Hani Kablawi, Hani, there you are, yes. Head of International at BNY Mellon. Ken Moore, MasterCard's Chief Innovation Officer. Ken, thank you. Patrick Zhong, M31 Capital's founder and managing partner. Thank you. And last but not least, Saudi Arabia's own Olayan Al-Wataid, CEO of Saudi Telecom. I'm Ryan Chilcott. I'm an Emmy-nominated international correspondent. I've spent more than 25 years running around the world looking at all things, including tech. I consider myself, relative to the panelists on in today's discussion, a meta-industrial Luddite, right? So I'd like to start the conversation there, and for you to perhaps, a few of you, to, in 30 seconds or less, explain to me what you think of when I say meta-industrial revolution. What the heck is that? Go ahead.
Looking at me, I'll start.
Yes.
Okay. Well, you know, the very fact that you're saying meta says that this is a lot to do with data. More data, so much data that is beyond what we know how to manage today. And industrial because it's applied to different industries. So that's one way to kind of think about it. I'll talk about it very briefly from a computational perspective. You know, there's 4 things that are happening concurrently, which is a positive circle. Starting with the ubiquitousness of computers. They're going to be everywhere. Do you think they're everywhere today? They'll be in more places. Second is the intercomputer connectivity, which is driven by what is called low latency. That means the speed of connection is shrinking very rapidly, so things that could be done in one computer can be done in several computers at the same time. And the third is the access to the cloud, the size of the cloud that continues to grow and therefore hosts more data. And the fourth is because of all of this, you're getting more data. And the more data you get, the better your algorithms get. The better your algorithms get, you know, the more things you can do with it, and can be applied to many different places. So the only other thing I'll say is that this is, in my mind, not something that stops. It's continuous, and it's growing exponentially, and the world 10 years from now, I can say is almost unimaginable from what it is today.
Well, that was a very long 30 seconds, Omar.
Could I maybe come in?
No,
sorry.
But, so, Ken, please, go ahead. And also, if you could address the issue of where does the internet and, let's say, Industry 3.0, as we think of it, end, and this meta-industrial revolution begin?
Sure. So maybe let me comment on the first question. I mean, if I was talking to my grandmother in an elevator, I would say to her, there are a collection of technologies out there that are individually important, but which will come together in ways, some of which we can imagine, some of which we can't now, that are going to change every business on the planet. And that would be my pitch to her. That is what the fourth, our meta-industrial revolution is. How it's different from the third is that the computational power, the data sets, the technologies that we have to play with in the fourth industrial revolution, up to and including the metaverse, the meta in the fourth industrial revolution, are coming at us with such speed and will be so transformative that we can start to see today what the world 3, 4, 5, and out to 7 years is going to look like.
If I may, the simplest form of looking at it is to say the jury is still out on the final definition of meta as we know it. However, as far as now is concerned, it's an evolution of Web 3.0 that is taking us to a stage where identity is being challenged and value exchange is being redefined in a way that makes a decentralized approach of content creation and value exchange.
Please.
So first of all, I think it's too fancy for people to talk about meta industry, something meta about anything. I think this is yet to be defined. For me, in a very simplistic way, is atoms meeting bytes. And also in the real world is different innovations from biotech, genomics, and to nanotechnology, and to Internet of Things, to AI, and all this coming together. And by the way, so with today you're meeting with some of the Chinese delegates coming to this event. Many of them are great practitioners in actually adding bytes to atoms. And they're all doing their own version of, I guess, this meta-industrial revolution. I don't think we should be too much fixated on the definition itself. And everybody is experimenting with their version. And I think it creates a lot of data. And that's making our productivity keep going up. And thanks to the contribution of your business.
And let me, Honey, if I could ask you, today, Meta, the company formerly known as Facebook, is releasing the Meta Quest Pro. It's a virtual reality headset. It's a set of goggles. It sells for $1,500, releasing today. The company's called Meta. Their goggles are called Meta, or at least they got them in the name. Is that the meta-industrial revolution?
Ryan, it's a very smart branding strategy, I would say. And
it's a branding strategy.
It started a couple of years ago with the renaming of the company. And I think it is a very smart branding strategy. I think if you were to go to the search engines, there actually isn't a unified, uniform definition of the metaverse today. And so you'll find, and therefore I actually agree with all of your speakers. And I would say it is potentially a coming together of augmented, virtual, and physical reality in a way that can be experienced cognitively a little bit differently than you might experience only one of these things on its own. And the other concept that still hasn't been shared here, and so maybe I'll extend on it a little bit, is that today there is a centralized world that we're already all operating in that brings physical and augmented and virtual realities together. We've been having virtual meetings for a very long time with augmented reality. We've been having we've been taking tours of innovation centers or cyber centers in virtual reality settings, and we've been training and developing our own staff for a while in that same way. But all of those things so far have been on what we'll call centralized platforms. And the revolution, if you want to call it that, or going to 3.0, might take us into an environment that is a little bit different, because it might bring decentralization to the underlying platforms. It might bring different worlds and platforms together. And therein lies a lot of questions that I'm sure we'll get into some of which.
Leon.
Yeah, I think the concept of decentralization is the theme around what is happening today on the meta as we know it. This is simply a complete shift where we will be transacting and doing business on a virtual world. And that is taking us to a stage where we need to create new ways of identifying people, transacting and doing value exchange in a totally different way than we do it today. That will include a lot of, obviously, technology development to empower all of that, including AI, artificial intelligence, and computing power, and so on. But will require a lot of policy making to make sure that whatever we are doing is going to be beneficial and hopefully not harmful.
Thank you, Patrice. So I think we're starting to get a definition, or at least what it encompasses. So is it here? What are the practical, are there already practical applications or manifestations of this? Has the meta-industrial revolution already broken through the door at TELUS?
Well, indeed, this is more an evolution than a revolution with these so-called enabling technologies. What makes, I would say, these technologies taste a bit different in our world is the nature of the customers we serve. Defense, satellite operators, pilots of civil aircrafts, airlines. So what does it mean for this set of customers? Well, we provide what I call mini-metaverse already. That's why I'm saying it's not new, it's a bit of an evolution. When we offer typically a synthetic environment for these guys to train. So simulation and training is extremely important. I call mini-meta because it doesn't gather millions of users, but a few tens or a few hundreds, it's already quite complex. And the second aspect, which has not been mentioned yet, is how cybersecurity is important. All these digital, I would say, technologies, all these digital revolutions with an S that we see are, I would say, sustainable on the long run if and only if we are able to guarantee the integrity of the data, the integrity of the identity of the people, because we operate what I call safety-critical operations. At the end of the day, life is at stake. So you cannot make a mistake, and you cannot be, I would say, hacked or spoofed by people. And this brings an additional, I would say, special taste to this meta concept.
Especially when you decentralize, right? So you can guarantee the identity of an avatar, for example, or how much an avatar might have in Bitcoin, Ether, or digital assets that you can create some value exchange on a Web 2.0 centralized platform. But how do you do that when you start bringing platforms together? How do I know that the avatar that I'm dealing with, just as an example, is who it says it is, and that they have the kind of value in their wallet that they say they have? And I think, to Patrice's point, that's going to be a critical thing to get right as we all try to move into this next version of the metaverse.
I think if I can make a quick point on that, just thought about it. One of the biggest challenges, in fact, is going to be the policy environment that has to be created to prevent bad use of the capability that's been created. Keeping up with that, I think, is actually going to be the bottleneck in the whole process. That's either that or it's just not going to be used and you'll get other problems. But the policy change mechanism is way too slow. It's not keeping up with the pace of change. And I think the industrialists and the entrepreneurs can move way more quickly. So I think there has to be a lot of work there. How policy change can keep up with this change, and change in days, not years.
I feel like, please.
If I may add a point to it. At this conference, and we're not just having technologists coming here, we also have the policymakers being part of the audience. And, today with your geopolitical sort of conflicts looming large on the horizon, people start to think about the regulation, they think about national interest, national security. And so that might become an impediment to the meta, right, and industrial revolution. I think this is something everyone should take a note of. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they're doing terrific jobs, and especially leveraging all these innovations across different areas. They're doing a remarkable job. And if there's one thing I think they feel frustrated about is regulation, is geopolitical kind of uncertainty. I mean, this actually got a lot of people very confused at this point.
But the other side of the coin is that you have to have some regulation.
Absolutely.
Okay? Independent of geopolitical, there can be all kinds of other abuse of the data.
We're just in a sort of uncharted water right now with this.
So maybe if I could come in on that point, because I think we have a lot of paradoxes still to play out. Web3, Web5 pushing towards decentralization, but who really wants to have custody of their own data? Which grandmother is really going to be able to have her own server, right? There are things, I think, ways in which regulations need to create roadmaps for us to navigate through that. Because it may be, rather than a fully decentralized world, we end up with some hybrid of centralized and decentralized. And I think that's probably more likely. But then on the other side of it, so if that's a kind of a paradox, we've also got the known and regulatory world in the context of finance, and then we have the slightly less well-known world around central bank issued digital currencies, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, solar credits, even data as asset classes, where the rules are still being written. And I think to get scale, we'll see lots of experimentation, but to transition from experimentation into use case at scale, we need roadmaps defined. And that's where I think, and I would really welcome the partnership of regulators in this room and more broadly to help us navigate.
But Patrice, I want to come to you, but just briefly, just because it feels like these two issues that you've identified, you collectively have identified over the last couple of minutes. One is cybersecurity and knowing that what you're seeing is real, I guess, on the one hand, and the other is regulation and having that roadmap. That those issues are most pronounced in finance right now. If we think about it, right, everybody's talking about, sort of Bitcoin theft and, is cryptocurrency a commodity or is it a currency, and who should regulate it? No one could agree. Is it the case that when we talk about this meta-industrial revolution, that these early issues are being most discussed, that it will affect the whole space in finance? And then I promise I'll come to you, but we'll go to one more finance guy, and then come to you. I promise, Patrice.
So the quick answer on this is that you have multiple speeds. Industry is definitely playing it faster than regulators, and politicians and policymakers are actually driving the regulators to try and come up with an answer quickly, because no politician wants for their jurisdiction to be a latecomer to what is going to be an important industry. So there are some markets, some regulators who are a little bit farther ahead than others in this space. And then maybe the other thing I'd say is we have started experimenting and playing with the custody of, you mentioned custody, the custody of digital assets. And in the first instance, the digital asset that exists that we can custodize happens to be Bitcoin and Ether. But the reason we did that wasn't because we want to custodize Bitcoin and Ether. Eventually, this is about tokenization of other assets. Yes, public assets, but one could say there's not much of a problem in clearing, settling, custodizing public assets today. But there is in private assets, real estate, art, and other forms of assets that are illiquid, that are hard to fractionalize, and that are difficult for people to actually want to invest in, to actually do so. And so this is about creating the rails in this new environment to enable people to actually invest in assets that have been very difficult to invest in so far.
Let me go to Patrice and then.
No, let me just bring another idea to this discussion. Another idea to this discussion. Be it for finance, be it for medcare, healthcare, or telecom, we all need to protect our data. It all starts with data, okay? Protecting data means encrypting data, cryptology. And the fact that quantum computing will arrive one day, and we were discussing that backstage, is both a fantastic opportunity, to deal with very complex mathematical problems, issues, and to solve things that were impossible to solve before. But at the same time, this same computer would be able to break any crypto algorithm known for the moment. So privacy will disappear. Our digitalization, be it for Meta or any other kind of digital transformation, will be at threat. Then we need to work on this second aspect, which is less favorable. How do we invent new algorithms to continue to protect our data, even if quantum computing will arrive one day?
Just if you just imagine what we are talking about in a simplistic way. This is the life that we are living in, the physical world that we are more or less living in and doing business and going through each and everything that we know today. There will be a totally new virtual life that is going to be driving business, telling people how to educate themselves, helping us to test all new ideas in a much faster, more computing power being used and so on. It needs to be safe. It needs to be secure. Data governance and data protection, taxation mechanisms needs to be all there, and so on and so forth. It's still nascent, moving into different stages in different countries, but I think it is here to stay and here to happen at some point. And it's a function of how we collectively approach it as countries and as industries to really move into it one stage at a time, because it's an ecosystem that will come together and a couple of technologies that will come together to shape it.
Patrick, if I might, very briefly, give me an example of a manifestation, a use of a product or service from the meta-industrial revolution that you've touched in business already.
And so we invest globally. I invested in an American company, is leading in global early stage cancer diagnostic business. It's called GRAIL. And they have conducted the largest clinical trial in human history with 300,000 patients enrolled, so they have a lot of data. But interestingly, most of people thought this is just a healthcare play. But half of the team, they're AI guys. They came from Google. And so I talked to some of the AI experts in the world. Now we're talking about speed of change, and they said that speed of learning by the machines is 10x a year. And that's how fast. You know, in the real world, we talk about revenue is, doubling is a lot. But the amount of the speed of learning is 10x or even faster than that. Then on top of that, when you have great findings coming out of this, then you start, this is still a real world product because it's a kit, it's a diagnostic kit. And then it's subject to Wright's law. Every time you double the volume, the cost will also come down. So it's really amazing. It's atoms meeting bytes. And a lot of kind of this good stuff, innovations kind of blended into one business model, creating really, really powerful business. And every person in this room could be benefiting from it in a very, very large way. It's not just a healthcare product, it's prescribed by the doctors, it's actually a consumer level product because everybody, when you get to a little bit older, age 50 and older, the chance of getting cancer is real for everybody. The whole game is finding it early, so this is AI at play. This is, I think, meta-industry revolution at play.
But to that point, and I agree with everything that you said, then you said it very well, but the other side you'll just throw at it. I'm a supporter of this, but at the same time, I'll give you an example along the lines you're talking about. People get stroke, okay? And sometimes when the stroke happens, you don't know when it's going to happen. It certainly happens. And we've built methods through which you know people who are at risk and so on and so forth, and you kind of keep an eye on them. Through this methodology, if you get access to what patients or what people are doing, there are probably habitual changes in people or habitual trends in people that can predict a stroke like weeks and weeks and weeks before it actually happens, okay, which is in principle a good thing. Then you can do something about it and keep that person alive or well. The bad thing is your privacy goes away because I know exactly what you're doing all the time, and from that I can predict that, well, you went to this room 5 times or you did this 5 times, your privacy's gone away. Are you willing to put up with that if it's going to save your life? So this is I don't have any black and white answers here, but the problem here is that the example you're giving is a positive example, but it can be used the wrong way, and that's why I say that the policy change methodology and the agenda also needs to understand what's going on. They can't apply yesterday's policies here. And I think there needs to be focus along that and thought along that so that they can keep up with this tool that we've got that we've all talked about.
It's interesting. So we've segued nicely from a conversation a little bit about use cases. Well, we started with what the heck is the meta-industrial revolution to what are the use cases, what they might be. We got a little bit into that, and we've now moved into it can be a force for good, though there are risks. Other risks, Ken? So 2 things. One, if you had to guess right now, the meta-industrial revolution will be more of a force for good or bad, and where do you see the opportunities versus the risks?
Sure. So let me start maybe on the kind of force for good side, because I think it's how we use the technology. Technology itself has to live within a framework, and it has to live within the confines of the companies that actually use it and the principles of those companies. So it can be good or it can be bad. Let me give you some examples of metaverse-style technologies, even augmented reality technologies, AI, so fourth industrial revolution technologies being used for good. To me, imagine today some of the industries. I was in Dubai recently, and a gentleman from the Dubai Ports Authority was talking about how they now have women, actually working in industries that used to require manual physical labor and therefore were dominated by men, right? But through artificial intelligence, through robotics, you're taking away the need for manual labor, and you're empowering sections of our economy that were excluded from those types of roles in the past. You can suddenly get them. Also, examples, people who maybe have physical disabilities, right? Maybe they're in a wheelchair, maybe they're suffering, maybe they don't speak a language, right? Suddenly technology can cross those barriers. So it opens up a huge amount of inclusivity angles, diversity angles. Similarly with sustainability. As we start to connect supply chains, I think we can do tremendous things for educating consumers on the choices that they make and how that can support the planet. And even for things like digital inclusion and financial inclusion, I think some of the digital assets we talked about, turning physical goods into assets that can be traded, rights, NFTs, things that were hard to actually trade and transact with before, can suddenly open up ways to include people, both financially and digitally, that were excluded. So there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic, but of course there are pitfalls and challenges.
So, I mean, we use 2.0, but the virtual reality gamification that leads to risk profile identification. So effectively, an individual puts these goggles on and plays a game, and it results in the ability of an interpreter of the game results to actually construct an investment portfolio that matches the risk profile of the individual that has just played the game. The risks that Patrice and Ken both identified is what happens if that data gets lost? What happens if there is a misinterpretation of that data? What happens if the fine print on that data in one country and the fine print in another country don't match? Can you use the data in the same way in different places? Now, you add decentralization to that, as we were saying earlier, and then you've got a supposedly borderless technology superimposed on which is a bunch of borders that just don't make any sense. And we've got to get through all of that.
Another risk, Oleon, if I could address this to you, is that as we already are now, we spend even more time sort of empowered by this immersive technology, by this revolution, apart. Yeah. I spend 12 hours a day on my phone. That's 12 hours I'm not talking to other people. If we're talking about the pluses and minuses...
I agree with you. The amount of time that's been spent on the internet, as we know it today, is already reaching to those levels where we need to be careful. I'm afraid with this new life, within the digital life and virtual reality, more time is going to be spent, which we have to worry about the consequences of it, whether it's the signs of depression or the signs of obesity or the signs of being ignorant sometimes to ethical behaviors or being connected to the world in a way that means something to us in the real world. I think all of these are very important to be looked into as we are moving towards the adoption of the technology. We haven't reached yet to the stage where we need to have to attend to issues as far as now is concerned, but I think it's coming and we need to be prepared for it. Things that will define what is ethical for people to be looked into in this new world. Things that relates to preserving culture and making sure that cultural heritage is being preserved across the globe is very important. we think that these are elements that needs to be preserved and as we move forward and define a new norm within the virtual world.
Yeah, just let me go to Patrice, please.
Yeah, just to remind on these different points, I do think as tech companies, we can do things to prevent, I would say, wrong usages of, or wrong use cases of technologies. We cannot wait for governments to write or issue regulation. That's one part of the answer. But we have also our own responsibility with our own engineers to make sure that when they developed AI algorithm, for instance, or when we use biometrics, if I take another technology, we set, I would say, internal kind of guidelines, charter, to push our people to think how they can, I would say, counter unconscious bias in algorithm, how they can think of the, I would say, end usage of the technology, so that we have our own, I would say, ways to mitigate this bad or less positive aspect of technologies and work for the good.
I want to broach our last topic or idea that we cannot avoid here, which is we're supposed to be looking at how this revolution is going to affect the new global order. And I was just thinking about how, historians say, hey, I'll make sure that we're on the right side of history because I'm going to write it. And I wonder if it's the same in technology, where if you produce the components that are necessary to enable this revolution, then you can make sure that you're okay, but those that don't have the technology aren't necessarily okay. So I'm wondering, Omar, to put you on the spot, as one of the world's largest chip makers, if, for example, this does exist. Intel has this ability to, and headquartered in the United States has this ability to produce these chips, but not everyone necessarily will get to access those chips and that technology. What do you make of that? I mean, and what do we need to do to ensure that everyone is along for the ride in a good sense with this revolution?
Well, from a business perspective, if everyone is not allowed those chips, my business will be smaller. So
sure.
I'm going to watch that for a start.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give it to people who need it. Now, the only reason you don't want to give it to others is because, there's usage that you don't want or someone doesn't want with the chip that you're producing. And that goes back to, how it's being used and what it's being used for. And it goes back to the policy and the regulations that we talked about. I mean, I don't have any black and white answers here, but all I know is that two things. First, the demand will continue to grow. That's not going to stop. So there's an unending demand of chips because it's the core of everything we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The second is the fact that, there's global balancing that's happening right now is needed. Forget about the geopolitics, just from a but from a disaster perspective. You put all your chips in one place and there's a cyclone there and you shut it down. That's not a good thing.
Yeah.
You need backups. So it needs to be globally diversified for all kinds of logical reasons. So, I don't know how you stop things completely.
Yeah.
They'll come up with their own version of it at some point.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to this regulation thing that we talked about, that it's important for us to think through that, and the regulators have to, working with us, move at a much, much faster speed, and they have to realize that.
Patrick, I want to give you an opportunity to
Well, listen,
respond to that. I mean, M31 invests in Chinese companies, some of which, for example, I'm going to have to wrap this up, so if you can keep your answer to like 30 seconds. But, you invest in some Chinese companies that want to go global that, for example, don't have access to Intel's chips right now.
Yeah, first of all, I think when we talk about businesses, a lot of times we think about is American companies or Chinese companies from whatever, wherever. But here's the thing. If you're a real good business, you're helping the world solve a real problem. And look, today, there is a big inflation globally. There's energy inflation, but who are solving the problems? And 97% of the solar supplies are coming from China. But when you go to those companies, you think this is just old traditional manufacturing businesses. No, you walk in this year, I visited a few of them. you actually don't see workers, human workers. It's fully automated. And there's Internet of Things and in real action. It's really amazing to see how much computing power is going to be actually leveraged, employed to achieve something really amazing for everybody. We are all looking for solutions for our problems. The company could be from Saudi Arabia, could be from China, could be from America, and I think they're doing real stuff.
Well, if the Meta-Industrial Revolution was a movie, I hope this was a very useful trailer, because it was very quick, and I think we covered a lot of ground. So Patrick, everyone please join me in thanking Patrice, Omar, Hani, Ken, Patrick, of course, again, and Olean. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Our leaders are getting old. Studies show that leadership positions are now more predominantly held by older people than at any point in history. And yet, half of the world's population is aged under 30. Humanity is younger than ever and has new perspectives on what leadership should be. How can we preserve knowledge from previous generations while allowing Gen Z to develop its own leadership strategies? Should investors fund training of future leaders? Who among up-and-coming Gen Z leaders are those to watch?
More open to new ideas. The old generation, they're not as much. So I think there's a bit of a clash there.
We are more traveling.
Each generation has a different point of view, but everyone knows the world is changing.
Well, I do think we grow up with very, very different values, and sometimes maybe we struggle to emphasize with each other. So I do think there's just conflict of missing understandings.
It's a lot more technology with phones and that kind of stuff.
Empathy.
One that's willing to learn from people.
I think qualities of like understanding, acceptance.
When you listen to other people, what they want, not only what you want for yourself.
Maybe some discipline, maybe some structure.
I think definitely, being open to listening and taking your time before, I guess, coming to conclusions.
Ability to speak, because I saw that all Generation Z, they're always on the phone and they just text messages and they can't speak.
Patience and managing finances are key values that we all need to learn from previous generations.
I think younger people might be more willing to give up easier when times get hard, so just being able to push through the hard times.
Maybe mentoring. By investing in our education system now.
More education.
By investing in ongoing training programs and educational opportunities.
I can't really think of anything that they need to invest. I think they're doing a good job thus far.
So, welcome to our summit within a summit, the clash of generations. Demography may not actually be destiny, but it can absolutely shape our policies. A recent report by the FII, Richard spoke about it this morning, shows that while everyone is concerned about the cost of living, youth are worried about unemployment, and older generations worried about their shrinking social safety nets, healthcare, pensions, and so on. In New York just last week, the Association of Retired Persons issued a report showing that older voters dominate elections because they vote and younger folks do not. That really reminded me of a conversation I had for my podcast with Mark Malloch Brown, one of the leading experts on global development, talking about the tsunami of crises, some of the things that we have been focusing in this summit over the last few hours. And he said that part of the problem is that the global north can't hear the alarms coming from the global south. And he said the solution was for young people to step up and create a new kind of international relations where the issues they worry about, the issues of the future, are top priorities. And you know what they are: economic, racial, and gender equity, sustainable global growth that improves lives and protects the planet, technology for good, all those subjects we're talking about in this summit. And while the clash of generations is a challenge, it's also such an enormous opportunity. If we invest wisely in the generations of humanity who are our future, and frankly, already such a big part of today. So let's get right to it, starting on the ground here with our hosts in Saudi Arabia, where, like other parts of the world, over 2/3 of the population is under 35. Let's give a warm FII welcome to the CEO of the MISC Foundation, Dr. Badr Al-Badr. He'll be asking, is there a clash of generations?
القائد زمان يا حبيبي كان الوضع رسمي أكثر من أنه حبي زي دحين. الوضع لازم تاخذ موعد عشان تروح تتكلم معاه.
كان عندهم قساوة أكثر.
مايكرو مانجمنت ستايل كان متعب في المنظمات.
القرار جاء كذا أو الأمر جاء كذا لازم يتنفذ كما أنزل.
دائما في فاصل، في مكتب وفي سكرتارية، وممكن القائد شخص أنت ما تقدر تتكلم معه وتاخذ راحتك معه وما هو قريب منك، ما هو شبهك، أو بالعادة يكون شخص كبير في السن. وما أريكم إلا ما أرى يعني. بالنسبة لي كانت صورة المدير هو إنسان متحكم، هو إنسان دائما يأمر وأنت تنفذ، ما يقبل الآراء.
وكان في خوف بين الامبلويز والمدير نفسه.
ما يدي أي أحد مجال يتكلم أو يعطي آراء أو يطرح أفكار.
I'm here today to address the clash between generations, as we have seen in the video. Leaders, executives, thinkers, ladies and gentlemen of all generations, I'm delighted to be with you here today in the 6th edition of FII. I'm always excited to be FFI and FII to the extent that I never missed a virgin. I'm especially excited about this one here. And I'm honored to be invited for the second time to speak about this important topic. Perhaps they chose me because of my age, and they think that I've seen so many generations in the workplace that I know one thing or two about talking about or working with different generations. This topic reminds me of a recent conversation that I had with a friend who was also a relative, which means that I know him from a long time and we grew up together. The father talked to me. He was extremely worried about his son. He told me, you know, my son, you know him from a young age. He was young and restless. Now, he's beyond his 20s, well into his 30s. He's not young anymore, but he's still restless. He jumps from stint to stint, project to project, with no stability in mind. Ironically, I also know the son who comes to me for mentorship. The son authored 4 books, done 2 startups, and now is well into his 3rd startup, and is having very good traction. To me, this story is another example of the gap between the generations. But let me ask you a question here. Do you think the year that you were born really defines the way you behave, the way you think, your value and work style, your values and work style? Or in other words, does the generation to which you belong really define you? There is definitely a gap here. And as we have seen from the video, the gap is there's like an older camp which is characterized as conservative, controlling, even to the point we heard it, cruel. Then we have the newer camp of the young who are positive, progressive, and people-oriented. Is that a clash of generations? I tend to disagree with the characterization of it as a clash of generations for 2 reasons. The first reason, I see it a bit disrespectful of this older generation of whom we are the products and to whom we go for wisdom, their experience and knowledge. But more importantly, this narrative of clash of generations boxes you in a box that you are part of a generation. You need to think a certain way and act a certain way just because you're part of this or that generation. To me, it's more of a clash of mindsets, a clash of work styles. In Saudi Arabia in particular, we are embarking on a very ambitious journey to Vision 2030 with its 3 pillars. We're doing it in a world that is fast changing and very complex. We have just came out of the pandemic, Corona, do you all remember? Then we have global conflict, and now we have economic difficulties. And this complex backdrop, we are here to transform our future. To do that, at the Mohammed bin Salman Foundation, MISC, we studied very deeply the leadership traits needed for the leaders of the future. The reason we're doing it is because we are on a mission, on a journey to create the leaders of the future that would lead us to Vision 2030. It's part of our mandate to empower talented Saudi youth. As our study came out with a competency model or a leadership model that identifies the traits of the leaders of the future. I don't have time now to go through the 7 competencies. You could download the whole study from the paper on our website. It's in the link in my Twitter page, in my speaker profile. But I'll take you through an example. A competency, by the way, is just a complex word for sets of behaviors, values, personal attributes, skills that a person or a leader need to adhere to or live up to. One of those competencies, and arguably the most important one, is being a principled leader. That competency does not dictate a set way of action, but actually gives you 2 polarities or a spectrum of work styles or behaviors to choose from depending on the situation. Some of it part of what we characterize as the old camp, some of it part of the new camp. And you're free to choose whatever matches the situation. Let me give you 2 examples of that competency. One is being risk averse on the one side, conservative, on the other side, being reckless and a risk taker. And you are to choose as a leader where to be and what is benefit or matches the situation. Another example of that is being charitable versus being economically sustainable. And another competency is being a force for the future. And there you can have behaviors to select from the polarities of being very slow and conservative all the way to being fast and entrepreneurial. Or being respectful and bound by tradition and social hierarchy to being socially experimenting. These competencies and the importance of them and the applicability change depending on the situation, as I said. For example, during the COVID pandemic, priorities changed. The whole world order changed. We have done a study at the MISC Foundation on post-pandemic leadership and found that being a principled leader, for example, remained as the most important competency before, during, and after the pandemic. However, being people-centric, and that included looking at the health and well-being of people, shot all the way to being one of the top during the pandemic and after. The competency model and prescribing to leaders how to work is one side. Another area that we're focusing on is dialogue. And that's what we're doing today, and me opening the session on multi-generational dialogue. We will continue this dialogue in this same hall in 2 weeks at the MISC Global Forum. But what we're discussing is a continuation of what we're saying here today, is that the generations need to talk to each other There's no one right or wrong way. We need to learn from each other. And there are a common goal that we need to reach. There's a transformation. There's a very ambitious transformation that's ahead of us. And we need to select among old and new work styles that benefits the situation. Going back to the story, to the father, I told him at the end that at this day and age, what worked for us is not necessarily the best for our children. There are many ways of success these days. And don't worry about your son. I see him well set on his way to success. But also the son, I told him that you need to be respectful of your father's fears, but you also need to learn from your father's wisdom and plan well for your financial security. And to all of you here with me today, whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or like me, in your 50s, or even older or younger, I say that you are free to choose to which generation do you belong in terms of your work style. I actually invite you to be part of what we call at MISC as the generation transformation. The generation that will lead transformation in this country, or what we call Generation T. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Potter, for laying out the challenge. The story that you told really does show that there can be a difference, a gap between how the older and the younger see the world. So how can leaders harness those differences to take us forward? And to consider that question, we have a formidable leader herself. She is the ambassador of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to the United States. I want you to give a very warm welcome to Her Royal Highness, Princess Rima, and her guests.
Hello, good evening, everyone. So sorry, we have a little change of schedule. Let me introduce myself. I'm Matteo Renzi. I'm the former Prime Minister of Italy, but I'm a proud member of FII Institute, a Future Investment Initiative with Richard here. And in this role, I'm so proud to welcome here a great friend of Saudi, a great friend of Middle East, and a great friend also of mine, Jared Kushner. And that is a great pleasure to be with Jared here. But I'm Italian, and you know, Italian guys have a lot of export. Fashion, food, also great technology, healthcare industry. And now we have a new asset of export. We export instability. UK try to be as Italy, but they have 44 days of government, a great result. Italians do it better because we change more or less a government every year. And so we will see what could happen. I start from that because the idea with Jared is discuss about the crisis around the world, particularly in politics, but not only in politics. And starting about that means, look what happened in the map. This morning we listened a lot of great discussions. We listened about economy, finance, population, demography, poverty. Please look just 1 minute what happened today in the geopolitical map. I started from UK just to joke against our British guys and British friends, but we have a problem in all European countries. We have a problem from Japan. I was just 3 weeks ago in the ceremony for remember Abe Shinzo,